Somewhere beneath the canopy of the densest jungle on the planet, buried under centuries of roots, soil, and silence, an entire world waits to be found. Cities that once held tens of thousands of people. Roads that stretched for miles through impossible terrain. Temples that touched the sky. And then, without warning, without explanation, they vanished. Swallowed by the earth itself, as if the planet decided to take back what was hers. We think we know history. We think the story has been written, the chapters closed, the timeline settled. But what if it hasn't? What if beneath our feet, beneath the forests and the deserts and the ocean floors, there are civilizations so advanced, so enormous, so sophisticated that their very existence forces us to ask a terrifying question: what else have we gotten wrong? This is the story of lost civilizations. Not myths. Not fairy tales. Real places, real people, real empires that rose to extraordinary heights and then disappeared so completely that for centuries, even millennia, the world forgot they ever existed. Until now. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. The air is thick and wet. The heat wraps around you like a second skin. Above you, the canopy is so dense that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor. You are standing in the Amazon rainforest, one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, a region so vast and so wild that entire rivers run through it without ever being mapped. For centuries, the Western world believed this place was a green hell, a wilderness so hostile that no large civilization could ever have taken root here. The indigenous peoples who lived in the Amazon were thought to be small, scattered groups, nomadic or semi-nomadic, living off the land in simple ways. The jungle, we were told, could not sustain anything more complex. That belief was wrong. Spectacularly, profoundly, embarrassingly wrong. In the late 20th century, archaeologists began to notice strange things in the Amazon. Earthworks that seemed too regular, too geometric, to be natural. Mounds of soil that looked like they had been placed deliberately. Ditches that ran in straight lines for hundreds of meters. But the jungle made it nearly impossible to investigate. The vegetation was too thick, the terrain too treacherous, the scale too enormous. Then came LiDAR. Light detection and ranging. A technology originally developed for other purposes entirely. LiDAR works by firing millions of laser pulses from an aircraft toward the ground. The lasers pass through the gaps in the canopy, bounce off the earth below, and return to the sensor. A computer then strips away the vegetation digitally, revealing the bare surface of the ground beneath. And when researchers pointed LiDAR at the Amazon, what they found was staggering. In the Upano Valley of eastern Ecuador, nestled in the foothills of the Andes, LiDAR revealed an ancient urban center that nobody knew existed. Not a village. Not a collection of huts. A city. A vast, planned, organized city with thousands of structures spread across hundreds of square kilometers. The discovery was published in the journal Science in January of 2024, and it sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. The site dates to approximately 2,500 years ago, which means it was thriving at roughly the same time as the Roman Republic was consolidating power in Europe. But this was no Roman outpost. This was something entirely different. The Upano complex consists of more than 6,000 earthen mounds arranged in careful geometric patterns. These mounds serve as platforms for buildings, residential areas, ceremonial spaces, and public gathering places. They were connected by a network of wide, straight roads that cut through the landscape with a precision that suggests centralized planning and coordinated labor. The roads are particularly remarkable. Some of them stretch for more than 20 kilometers, running in straight lines through terrain that is anything but flat. Building these roads would have required clearing dense vegetation, leveling uneven ground, and maintaining the routes over time. This is not the work of a small, disorganized group. This is infrastructure. This is engineering. This is the kind of public works project that requires leadership, organization, surplus food production, and a large, stable population. And the population was large. Estimates based on the density and distribution of the mounds suggest that tens of thousands of people may have lived in the Upano complex at its peak. Some researchers believe the number could be even higher, potentially rivaling or exceeding the populations of contemporary cities in other parts of the world. To put this in perspective, many European cities during the same period were significantly smaller. The people who built Upano were not just surviving in the Amazon. They were thriving. They had figured out how to manage the landscape, how to grow food in sufficient quantities to feed a large population, how to organize labor on a massive scale, and how to create a built environment that reflected their social structure and cultural values. They had done all of this in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. But who were they? That remains one of the great unanswered questions. The Upano civilization left no written records that we have found. We do not know what they called themselves, what language they spoke, what gods they worshipped, or what stories they told around their fires at night. We know them only through the things they left behind in the earth, the mounds, the roads, the fragments of pottery, the traces of their presence that endured long after the people themselves were gone. And they are gone. At some point, the Upano civilization declined and eventually disappeared. The jungle reclaimed the city, covering the mounds with soil and vegetation, hiding the roads beneath roots and undergrowth, erasing the visible traces of a culture that had flourished for centuries. Why they left or what happened to them is unknown. Climate change, environmental degradation, social upheaval, conflict, disease, any of these could have played a role. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something we have not yet considered. What we do know is that the discovery of Upano fundamentally challenges the old narrative about the Amazon. The idea that this region was an untouched wilderness, a primeval forest that had never been significantly altered by human activity, is no longer tenable. The Amazon was shaped by human hands. Its soils, its plant distributions, its very ecology bear the fingerprints of civilizations that lived there for thousands of years. The forest we see today is not the forest that existed before these people arrived. It is, in many ways, a garden gone wild, a managed landscape that was abandoned and allowed to grow over. This realization has profound implications, not just for our understanding of the Amazon, but for our understanding of human civilization itself. We have long assumed that the great civilizations of the ancient world arose in certain specific places: the Fertile Crescent, the Nile Valley, the Indus River Basin, the Yellow River region of China. These were the cradles of civilization, the places where the conditions were right for agriculture, urbanization, and the development of complex societies. The Amazon was never on that list. It was considered too hostile, too unpredictable, too marginal. But Upano, and the many other discoveries that have followed it, suggest that we need to redraw the map. Complex civilization was not limited to a handful of favored regions. It arose in places we never expected, in environments we thought were inhospitable, among peoples we dismissed as primitive. The story of human civilization is far richer, far more diverse, and far more surprising than we ever imagined. The discoveries in Ecuador were remarkable, but they were not isolated. Across the Amazon basin, researchers have been finding evidence of large-scale human occupation in places that were previously thought to be empty wilderness. In Bolivia, in the Llanos de Mojos region, aerial surveys and satellite imagery have revealed vast networks of earthworks, canals, raised fields, and causeways that cover thousands of square kilometers. These features were created by pre-Columbian societies that engineered the landscape on a scale that rivals anything found in the ancient world. The raised fields are particularly impressive. In a region that floods seasonally, creating large areas of standing water, the ancient inhabitants built elevated planting surfaces surrounded by channels. The channels served multiple purposes. They drained excess water during the wet season, they stored water during the dry season, they provided habitats for fish that could be harvested for food, and the nutrient-rich muck that accumulated in them could be spread on the raised beds as fertilizer. This was not simple farming. This was a sophisticated system of landscape management that maximized food production in a challenging environment. The causeways connected communities across the flooded landscape, allowing people to travel and trade even during the wet season when much of the ground was underwater. Some of these causeways stretch for kilometers, running straight and level through the flat terrain. Like the roads at Upano, they represent a significant investment of labor and planning. The scale of these earthworks suggests that the Llanos de Mojos was home to a large and well-organized population. Estimates vary, but some researchers believe that hundreds of thousands of people may have lived in the region before European contact. If those estimates are even roughly accurate, then the Llanos de Mojos was one of the most densely populated areas in pre-Columbian South America. And yet, by the time European explorers arrived, the great earthwork builders were gone. Their fields had flooded and silted over. Their causeways had crumbled. Their cities, if that is the right word for them, had been absorbed back into the landscape. The Europeans saw an empty wilderness and assumed it had always been that way. They were wrong. Further north, in the heart of the Brazilian Amazon, another kind of evidence has been emerging. In the upper Xingu region, archaeologists have documented a network of villages connected by roads, surrounded by ditches and earthen walls, and organized in a pattern that suggests a hierarchical society with distinct political and ceremonial centers. These sites date to roughly 800 to 1400 of the Common Era, and they show a level of planning and organization that was completely unexpected. The villages are arranged in clusters, with larger central settlements surrounded by smaller satellite communities. The central settlements feature large plazas, sometimes circular, sometimes rectangular, that served as gathering places for ceremonies, markets, and public events. The roads connecting the villages are wide and straight, often flanked by low walls or bordered by ditches. The overall pattern is remarkably regular, suggesting that the layout was planned rather than organic. What makes these sites particularly fascinating is that the people who built them were apparently not using stone or metal for their constructions. Their buildings were made of wood and thatch, materials that decay quickly in the tropical environment. What remains are the earthworks, the ditches, the mounds, the roads, the durable imprints of a society that built its visible structures from perishable materials, but left its mark on the land itself. This raises an important point about how we think about civilization. We tend to equate civilization with permanence, with stone temples and metal tools and written records. But the people of the Upper Xingu built a complex, organized, urban society without any of those things. They managed their environment, fed their population, organized their labor, and created a built landscape that reflected their social values, all without the materials that we typically associate with advanced civilization. If we judge them by the standards we apply to Egypt or Rome, they seem primitive. But if we judge them by what they actually accomplished, by the ingenuity and sophistication of their solutions to the challenges they faced, they were anything but. The story of lost civilizations in the Amazon took another dramatic turn with discoveries deep in the Guatemalan jungle, though this time the civilization in question was not unknown. It was the Maya. But what LiDAR revealed about the Maya was so extraordinary, so far beyond what anyone expected, that it effectively rewrote the history of one of the most studied civilizations in the ancient world. The Maya civilization has fascinated scholars and the public for more than a century. The great stone pyramids of Tikal and Chichen Itza, the intricate hieroglyphic writing system, the sophisticated calendar and astronomical observations, the elaborate art and mythology, all of these have made the Maya one of the iconic civilizations of the ancient world. But despite decades of research, much about the Maya remained mysterious, in part because the jungle made it extremely difficult to survey large areas. Archaeologists working in the Maya lowlands knew there were many sites still to be discovered. They could see mounds and structures poking through the canopy, and local people sometimes reported finding ruins in remote areas. But the sheer density of the vegetation made comprehensive mapping nearly impossible. Ground surveys were slow, expensive, and limited in scope. Researchers knew they were seeing only a fraction of what was out there. Then, in 2018, a massive LiDAR survey of the Maya Biosphere Reserve in northern Guatemala changed everything. The survey covered more than 2,000 square kilometers of dense jungle, and the results were nothing short of revolutionary. Beneath the canopy, the lasers revealed more than 60,000 previously unknown structures. 60,000. Houses, palaces, temples, fortifications, causeways, quarries, terraces, irrigation systems, and agricultural fields, all hidden beneath the trees. The implications were staggering. The Maya lowlands were not sparsely populated, as had long been assumed. They were densely settled, with a population that may have been far larger than previous estimates. Some researchers now believe that the Maya lowlands may have supported a population of 10 to 15 million people at their peak, a number that would make the region one of the most densely populated areas in the pre-modern world. Among the most remarkable sites revealed by LiDAR was El Mirador, a massive Maya city in the Petén region of Guatemala. El Mirador was not unknown before the LiDAR surveys. Archaeologists had been working there since the late 1970s, and they knew it was an important site. But the LiDAR data revealed that El Mirador was far larger and more complex than anyone had realized. The city dates to the pre-classic period of Maya history, roughly from about 600 before the Common Era to about 100 of the Common Era. This makes it one of the earliest major Maya cities, predating the Great Classic period cities like Tikal and Calakmul by centuries. And yet El Mirador was enormous. Its central area covers approximately 26 square kilometers, and it features some of the largest pyramids ever built in the Maya world. The La Danta Pyramid at El Mirador is one of the most massive structures in the ancient world by volume. Rising about 72 meters above the forest floor, it is not as tall as the Great Pyramid of Giza, but when you include its enormous base platform, its total volume exceeds that of the Egyptian monument. Building La Danta would have required millions of cubic meters of fill material, all of it carried and placed by hand, without metal tools, without wheeled vehicles, without draft animals. The labor required was immense, and it implies a society with the organizational capacity to mobilize thousands of workers over extended periods. El Mirador was connected to other cities by a network of causeways called Sacbiab, the Maya word for white roads. These causeways were raised above the surrounding terrain, surfaced with limestone plaster, and wide enough for large groups of people to travel along them. Some of the Sacbiab at El Mirador stretched for more than 20 kilometers, connecting the city to satellite communities and neighboring urban centers. The causeway system suggests that El Mirador was the center of a regional political network, a capital city that exerted influence over a wide area. But El Mirador did not last. Around the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era, the city went into decline. Its population dwindled, construction ceased, and the jungle began to reclaim the plazas and pyramids. The reasons for this decline are debated. Some researchers point to environmental degradation, arguing that the Maya deforested the surrounding area to build their city and grow their crops, leading to soil erosion, water pollution, and agricultural failure. Others suggest that political instability, warfare, or shifts in trade routes may have played a role. Whatever the cause, El Mirador was largely abandoned, and the jungle took it back. Not far from El Mirador, another lost Maya city has emerged from the green darkness. Valeriana, located in the southern part of the Mexican state of Campeche, was discovered through LiDAR surveys in 2023. The site covers a vast area and contains hundreds of structures, including pyramids, plazas, residential complexes, and ball courts. Like El Mirador, Valeriana dates primarily to the pre-classic period, suggesting that the earliest phases of Maya civilization were far more extensive and urban than previously believed. Valeriana is significant because it adds to the growing body of evidence that the Maya lowlands were home to a network of large, interconnected cities during the pre-classic period. The old model of Maya civilization, which held that the classic period from about 250 to 900 of the Common Era was the height of Maya achievement, is being revised. It now appears that the Maya were building monumental architecture, organizing large populations, and creating complex political systems centuries earlier than we thought. The discovery of Valeriana also highlights how much of the Maya world remains unexplored. Despite more than a century of archaeological research, vast areas of the Maya lowlands have never been systematically surveyed. The jungle is simply too vast, too dense, and too difficult to penetrate. LiDAR has opened a window into this hidden world, but it is only a window. There are certainly more cities, more structures, more roads waiting to be found beneath the canopy. Further west, in the Mexican state of Michoacán, LiDAR has revealed another lost city that challenges our assumptions about ancient civilizations. Angamuco, a site belonging to the Purapeca civilization, was surveyed using LiDAR in 2018, and the results were astonishing. The survey revealed more than 40,000 structures spread across approximately 26 square kilometers of lava-covered terrain. 40,000 structures. That is roughly the same number of structures as the island of Manhattan. The Puripeka, also known as the Tarascans, were contemporaries of the Aztecs and one of the few Mesoamerican civilizations that the Aztecs were never able to conquer. They built a powerful state in western Mexico, with a sophisticated political system, a strong military, and a distinctive cultural tradition. But the full extent of their urban development was not appreciated until the LiDAR surveys revealed the true scale of Angamuco. The city was built on a lava flow, a challenging terrain that would seem to discourage large-scale settlement. But the Puripeka adapted to this environment, building their structures on and around the lava formations, creating a city that blended into the natural landscape in ways that made it nearly invisible from the ground. Without LiDAR, archaeologists walking through the site would have seen only scattered ruins, not recognizing that they were standing in the middle of one of the largest cities in the pre-Columbian world. Angamuco appears to have been a major political and economic center, with distinct zones for residential, commercial, and ceremonial activities. The city's layout suggests a high degree of social organization, with elite compounds, public plazas, and specialized areas for craft production. The sheer number of structures implies a population that may have numbered in the tens of thousands, making Angamuco one of the largest cities in Mesoamerica during its period of occupation. Like so many of the sites discussed here, Angamuco was eventually abandoned, and the lava terrain and encroaching vegetation hid it from view. The Puripeka state collapsed in the early 16th century following the Spanish conquest, and much of their urban heritage was forgotten. Angamuco lay hidden for centuries, waiting for a technology that could see through the veil of time and vegetation to reveal its true scale. The discoveries made possible by LiDAR and other remote sensing technologies have transformed our understanding of the ancient world, but they have also raised uncomfortable questions. If so many large, complex civilizations existed in places we never expected, what else have we missed? How many other cities lie buried beneath jungles, deserts, and ocean floors, waiting to be found? And perhaps more importantly, why did these civilizations disappear? The question of collapse is one of the most fascinating and troubling in all of archaeology. Throughout human history, complex societies have risen to great heights and then fallen, sometimes gradually, sometimes catastrophically. The reasons are as varied as the civilizations themselves, but certain patterns appear again and again. Environmental degradation, climate change, overexploitation of resources, warfare, disease, social inequality, political instability. Sometimes it is one of these factors in isolation. More often, it is a combination, a perfect storm of pressures that overwhelms the capacity of a society to adapt. The Amazon civilizations may have fallen victim to environmental pressures. Managing a tropical forest environment is inherently challenging. The soils are often nutrient-poor, and agricultural productivity depends on careful management of the land. Deforestation, soil erosion, and changes in rainfall patterns could all have undermined the food production systems that sustained large populations. When the food ran out, the cities emptied. The Maya may have faced similar challenges, compounded by political factors. The classic Maya civilization, which flourished from roughly the 3rd to the 9th centuries of the Common Era, experienced a dramatic collapse in the 9th century. Dozens of major cities in the southern lowlands were abandoned within a relatively short period. The causes of this collapse have been debated for decades, but the current consensus points to a combination of prolonged drought, exacerbated by deforestation and soil degradation, and intensified warfare between competing city-states. The drought theory is supported by multiple lines of evidence. Lake sediment cores from the Yucatan Peninsula show that the 9th century was one of the driest periods in the region's history, with several severe droughts occurring between roughly 820 and 910 of the Common Era. These droughts would have devastated agriculture, reducing crop yields and creating food shortages. In a society that was already under stress from warfare and political competition, the droughts may have been the tipping point. But the Maya collapse was not total. While the southern lowland cities were abandoned, Maya civilization continued to thrive in the northern Yucatan, where cities like Chichen Itza and Uxmal reached their peak in the centuries following the southern collapse. The Maya did not disappear. They adapted, migrated, and reorganized. Millions of Maya people continue to live in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador today, speaking Maya languages and maintaining cultural traditions that stretch back thousands of years. The lesson of the Maya collapse, and indeed of all the collapses discussed in this documentary, is not that civilizations are doomed to fail. It is that they are fragile. That the systems we build to sustain ourselves, our agriculture, our infrastructure, our political institutions, our social contracts, are all vulnerable to disruption. And when the disruptions come, as they inevitably do, the difference between survival and collapse often depends on the ability to adapt. Let us leave the jungles of the Americas for a moment and travel to a very different landscape, one of rocky plateaus and windswept plains, of ancient trade routes and forgotten empires. We are going to Anatolia, the great peninsula that bridges Europe and Asia, the land that is today the nation of Turkey. And we are going to meet a civilization that was so thoroughly erased from history that for nearly 3,000 years, the world did not even know it had existed. The Hittites. If you have heard of the Hittites at all, it is probably in passing, a brief mention in a history class or a footnote in a book about the ancient Near East. But the Hittites were one of the great powers of the Bronze Age, a civilization that rivaled Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria in military strength, political influence, and cultural sophistication. At their peak, around 1300 before the Common Era, the Hittite Empire controlled most of Anatolia, much of modern-day Syria, and parts of Mesopotamia. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the other great powers of the age knew it. The Hittites fought the Egyptians to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 before the Common Era, one of the largest chariot battles in history. The battle, fought near the Orontes River in what is now western Syria, involved thousands of chariots and tens of thousands of soldiers on each side. Neither side won a decisive victory, and the conflict eventually led to one of the earliest known peace treaties in human history, the Treaty of Kadesh, signed between the Hittite king Hattusili III and the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II. A copy of this treaty, inscribed on a clay tablet in Akkadian cuneiform, was found in the Hittite capital of Hattusa. Another copy, carved in hieroglyphics, adorns the walls of the temple at Karnak in Egypt. A reproduction of the tablet hangs in the United Nations headquarters as a symbol of the long human quest for peace. The Hittites were sophisticated in other ways as well. They were among the first peoples to work iron on a significant scale, a technological innovation that would eventually transform the ancient world. Their legal code, inscribed on clay tablets found at Hattusa, reveals a society that was remarkably progressive by ancient standards. Hittite law distinguished between intentional and accidental harm, prescribed fines rather than physical punishment for many offenses, and granted women a degree of legal autonomy that was unusual in the ancient Near East. The Hittite capital, Hattusa, was a formidable city. Located in central Anatolia, near the modern Turkish village of Bogazkale, Hattusa covered an area of about 2 square kilometers and was surrounded by massive fortification walls with towers and elaborate gateways. The most famous of these gateways, the Lion Gate and the King's Gate, feature monumental stone sculptures that still stand today, weathered but defiant, guarding the entrance to a city that has been empty for more than 3,000 years. Inside the walls, Hattusa contained temples, palaces, administrative buildings, and archives. The archives are particularly important. Thousands of clay tablets have been recovered from Hattusa, written in several languages including Hittite, Akkadian, Hurrian, and Sumerian. These tablets include diplomatic correspondence, treaties, religious texts, legal documents, and administrative records. They provide a remarkably detailed picture of Hittite society, governance, and foreign relations. But despite all their power, despite their military prowess, their diplomatic sophistication, their technological innovation, the Hittites vanished. Around 1200 before the Common Era, the Hittite Empire collapsed. Hattusa was burned and abandoned. The empire fragmented into a collection of small, independent city-states in southern Anatolia and northern Syria, known as the Neo-Hittite states. These survived for several centuries before being absorbed by the Assyrian Empire. And then the Hittites were forgotten. So completely were they forgotten that when European scholars first encountered references to the Hittites in ancient Egyptian and biblical texts, they did not know who these people were. The Egyptian records mentioned a great power called Hittite, and the Hebrew Bible referred to the Hittites as one of the peoples of Canaan. But there was no independent confirmation of their existence, no ruins that could be definitively identified as Hittite, no inscriptions that could be read. It was not until the late 19th century that the rediscovery of the Hittites began. In 1834, a French explorer named Charles Texier visited the ruins at Bogazkale and recognized them as something significant, though he did not identify them as Hittite. In the following decades, other travelers and scholars visited the site and began to piece together the evidence. The breakthrough came in 1906, when a German archaeologist named Hugo Winkler began systematic excavations at Bogazkale and discovered the royal archives, the thousands of clay tablets that confirmed the existence of the Hittite Empire and revealed its history in astonishing detail. The decipherment of the Hittite language was another major achievement. The Czech scholar Bedřich Hrozný published his decipherment of Hittite cuneiform in 1915, demonstrating that Hittite was an Indo-European language, related to Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. This was a surprise, as most of the known languages of the ancient Near East belonged to other language families. The discovery that an Indo-European language had been spoken in Anatolia in the second millennium before the Common Era had major implications for our understanding of the history and migration of Indo-European peoples. But the question remains, why did the Hittite Empire collapse? The fall of the Hittites was part of a much larger catastrophe, the Bronze Age collapse, one of the most devastating and mysterious events in ancient history. Around 1200 before the Common Era, within a span of just a few decades, nearly every major civilization in the eastern Mediterranean and Near East experienced severe disruption. The Hittite Empire fell. The Egyptian New Kingdom went into irreversible decline. The Mycenaean civilization of Greece collapsed. The great trading cities of the Levantine coast were destroyed. The palace economies that had dominated the region for centuries crumbled. The causes of the Bronze Age collapse are still debated, but most scholars now believe it was a systems collapse, a cascading failure triggered by multiple interconnected factors. Drought and famine, possibly caused by a shift in climate patterns, weakened agricultural production across the region. Invasions by groups known as the Sea Peoples, whose exact identity and origins remain mysterious, disrupted trade routes and destroyed coastal cities. Internal rebellions, possibly fueled by food shortages and social inequality, undermined political authority. The disruption of the international trade networks that linked the Bronze Age civilizations deprived them of essential resources, particularly tin, which was needed to make bronze. The result was a catastrophe. The interconnected world of the Bronze Age, with its international diplomacy, its long-distance trade, its shared technologies and cultural exchanges, came apart. The great palaces were burned. The written record ceased. Populations declined. In some areas, the level of social complexity dropped dramatically, and it would be centuries before it recovered. The Hittites were among the hardest hit. Their empire, which had been one of the pillars of the Bronze Age international order, simply ceased to exist. Hattusa was destroyed, and there is evidence that the destruction was violent. But who destroyed it, and why, remains uncertain. Was it the Sea Peoples? Internal rebels? Rival kingdoms? Or was the city simply abandoned by a population that could no longer sustain itself, and then burned by whoever happened to come along afterward? We may never know for certain. The Hittites, for all the richness of their archives, left no account of their own destruction. The last tablets from Hattusa hint at troubles, mentioning grain shortages and requests for food shipments from other regions. But the end, when it came, was not recorded. The scribes had already laid down their styluses. The fires had already begun. The fall of the Hittites is a sobering reminder that even the most powerful civilizations can be swept away. But at least we found Hattusa. At least we recovered the archives, deciphered the language, and pieced together the history. For some lost civilizations, we have not been so fortunate. Consider the case of the Akkadian Empire. Akkad was one of the first great empires in human history, the first to unite large parts of Mesopotamia under a single ruler. Its founder, Sargon of Akkad, is one of the most famous figures of the ancient world, a man whose story has become legend. According to the ancient texts, Sargon was of humble origins, a cupbearer to the king of Kish who rose to power through a combination of military genius and political cunning. He conquered the Sumerian city-states of southern Mesopotamia, extended his rule into Syria, Anatolia, and possibly beyond, and established an empire that lasted for about a century and a half, from roughly 2334 to 2154 before the Common Era. The Akkadian Empire was a transformative moment in human history. For the first time, a single political authority controlled a vast, ethnically diverse territory. The Akkadian language, a Semitic language related to later Babylonian and Assyrian, became the lingua franca of the ancient Near East, a status it would hold for more than 1,000 years. Akkadian art, with its naturalistic style and emphasis on royal power, influenced artistic traditions across the region. The very concept of empire, of a single ruler commanding a large territory through military force and administrative control, was in many ways an Akkadian invention. But here is the mystery. Despite the Akkadian Empire's enormous historical importance, despite the many ancient texts that mention Akkad and its rulers, despite centuries of archaeological investigation in Mesopotamia, the city of Akkad itself has never been found. Let that sink in. The capital of one of the most important empires in human history, a city that was legendary in the ancient world, a place that was celebrated in literature, cursed in poetry, and remembered for millennia after its fall, has never been located. We do not know exactly where it was. This is not for lack of trying. Archaeologists have searched for Akkad for more than a century. The ancient texts provide some clues. They suggest that Akkad was located somewhere in central Mesopotamia, probably on or near the Tigris or Euphrates River, possibly in the vicinity of modern Baghdad. But central Mesopotamia is a vast area, and millennia of river flooding, shifting channels, and sediment deposition have buried the ancient landscape under meters of alluvial deposits. Cities that once stood on the banks of rivers now lie far from the current channels, buried under agricultural fields or modern settlements. Some scholars have proposed specific locations for Akkad. The sites of Ishan Mizyad, Tel Muhammad, and several others have been suggested as candidates, but none has yielded conclusive evidence. The truth is that Akkad may be buried so deeply, or may have been so thoroughly destroyed, that it may never be found. The loss of Akkad is not just an archaeological puzzle. It is a metaphor for the fragility of memory. Here was a city that was famous throughout the ancient world, the seat of an empire that changed the course of history. And yet it has been so completely erased that we cannot even point to the place where it once stood. If a city as important as Akkad can be lost, what hope is there for the countless smaller settlements, the ordinary towns and villages where most people lived out their lives? How much of the human past has simply vanished, leaving no trace at all? The Akkadian Empire itself came to an end around 2154 before the Common Era, brought down by a combination of internal revolts, external invasions by the Gutian people from the Zagros Mountains, and what appears to have been a severe drought. Recent climate research has provided support for the drought theory. Studies of sediment cores from the Gulf of Oman and other locations in the Near East show evidence of a major arid event around 2200 before the Common Era, coinciding with the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. The ancient Sumerians themselves seem to have attributed the fall of Akkad to divine punishment. A remarkable literary text known as the Curse of Agade, composed probably in the 21st century before the Common Era, tells the story of Akkad's rise and fall as a morality tale. According to the text, the goddess Inanna blessed Akkad with prosperity, filling its warehouses with grain, its harbors with ships, and its streets with music and celebration. But the last Akkadian king, Naram-Sin, desecrated the temple of the god Enlil at Nippur, provoking the wrath of the gods. In punishment, they brought down upon Akkad a horde of barbarians, the Gudians, who destroyed the city and reduced it to ruins. The text ends with a curse, "May Akkad never be rebuilt." Whether the curse was effective or merely prophetic, Akkad was indeed never rebuilt. The city that had been the center of the world became a byword for destruction, a cautionary tale about the consequences of hubris. And then it was forgotten, buried not just under earth and sediment, but under the weight of time itself. From the desert plains of Mesopotamia, let us travel eastward to one of the most extraordinary and enigmatic civilizations of the ancient world. A civilization that, at its peak, was larger in geographic extent than either Egypt or Mesopotamia. A civilization that built planned cities with grid-patterned streets, advanced drainage systems, and standardized construction. A civilization that engaged in long-distance trade across thousands of kilometers of land and sea. And a civilization that, despite all its achievements, remains one of the least understood of all the great ancient cultures. The Indus Valley Civilization. Also known as the Harappan Civilization, after one of its major cities, the Indus Valley Civilization flourished in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent from roughly 3300 to 1900 before the Common Era. At its height, around 2500 to 1900 before the Common Era, it covered an area of approximately 1.3 million square kilometers, encompassing parts of modern-day Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. This makes it one of the largest civilizations of the ancient world in terms of geographic extent, rivaling or exceeding contemporary Egypt and Mesopotamia. The two best-known cities of the Indus Valley Civilization are Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Both are remarkable for their urban planning, which suggests a level of centralized authority and civic organization that was extraordinary for the time. The cities were laid out on a grid pattern, with wide main streets intersecting at right angles and narrower lanes providing access to residential blocks. This kind of planned urban layout does not happen by accident. It requires surveyors, planners, and the authority to enforce a consistent design across an entire city. Mohenjo-daro, located in the Sindh province of modern-day Pakistan, is perhaps the most impressive of the Indus Valley cities. At its peak, it may have housed a population of 30,000 to 50,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. The city was built on a series of artificial mounds, raising it above the floodplain of the Indus River. Its most famous feature is the Great Bath, a large, brick-lined pool that may have been used for ritual bathing or public ceremonies. The Great Bath is waterproofed with a layer of bitumen, a technique that demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of construction materials and engineering. But what truly sets Mohenjo-daro and other Indus Valley cities apart is their drainage and sanitation systems. Nearly every house in the city had a private bathroom and toilet, connected to a network of covered drains that ran beneath the streets. These drains carried wastewater away from the residential areas and emptied it into larger sewers or soakage pits. The system was maintained and periodically cleaned, as evidenced by the removable bricks that covered the drains, allowing access for maintenance. This may not sound remarkable to modern ears, but consider the context. In 2500 before the Common Era, most of the world's people lived in conditions that lacked any kind of organized sanitation. Even in later civilizations, including medieval European cities, sanitation was often rudimentary or non-existent. The Indus Valley's drainage system was not matched in sophistication anywhere in the ancient world, and in some respects, it was not equaled again for thousands of years. The Indus Valley Civilization was also notable for its apparent lack of monumental architecture dedicated to warfare or individual glorification. Unlike Egypt, with its enormous royal tombs, or Mesopotamia, with its ziggurats and palace complexes, the Indus Valley does not seem to have built structures designed to celebrate the power of individual rulers. There are no grand palaces that can be definitively identified, no royal tombs filled with treasure, no colossal statues of kings or pharaohs. This absence has led some scholars to speculate that the Indus Valley Civilization may have been governed differently from other ancient civilizations, perhaps by a council of elders, a merchant class, or a priestly elite, rather than by a single autocratic ruler. But this is speculation. The truth is that we do not know how the Indus Valley Civilization was governed, because we cannot read their writing. The Indus script, found on thousands of seals, tablets, and other objects, consists of approximately 400 to 600 distinct signs. Despite more than a century of effort, no one has been able to decipher it. The signs do not clearly correspond to any known language family. The inscriptions are typically very short, often just a few signs long, which makes pattern analysis difficult. Without bilingual texts, the equivalent of a Rosetta Stone for the Indus script, decipherment may be impossible. The inability to read the Indus script is one of the great frustrations of ancient studies. It means that an entire civilization, one of the largest and most sophisticated of the ancient world, remains essentially silent. We can study their buildings, their artifacts, their trade goods, and their burials. We can make inferences about their economy, their technology, and their daily lives. But we cannot hear their voices. We do not know their myths, their laws, their histories, or even their name for themselves. The term Indus Valley Civilization is a modern convenience. What these people called their own culture, we simply do not know. The Indus Valley Civilization reached its peak around 2500 before the Common Era and then, beginning around 1900 before the Common Era, entered a period of decline. The great cities were gradually abandoned. Mohenjo-daro shows evidence of reduced maintenance, with drains no longer being cleaned and buildings falling into disrepair. Harappa experienced a similar decline. By about 1700 before the Common Era, the urban phase of the civilization was essentially over. What happened? This is one of the great questions of ancient history, and the answer is still not entirely clear. For a long time, the dominant theory was that the Indus Valley Civilization was destroyed by invading Aryans, Indo-European nomads who swept into the subcontinent from Central Asia and overwhelmed the indigenous urban civilization. This theory, which was popular in the early and mid-20th century, has largely fallen out of favor. There is little archaeological evidence for a violent invasion, and the decline of the Indus cities appears to have been gradual rather than sudden. The current consensus favors a more complex explanation involving climate change and environmental degradation. There is growing evidence that the Indus region experienced a significant shift in rainfall patterns around 2000 before the Common Era. The summer monsoon, which provides most of the region's rainfall, appears to have weakened, leading to reduced river flows and declining agricultural productivity. At the same time, the Gagarhakra River system, which watered many Indus Valley settlements in what is now the Thar Desert region, may have dried up or shifted its course, depriving communities of their water supply. These environmental changes would have had devastating consequences for a civilization that depended on agriculture and river water. As the water supply diminished and crop yields fell, the urban populations could no longer be sustained. People dispersed into smaller, more rural settlements, abandoning the great cities for villages and hamlets where they could eke out a living from the dwindling resources. This was not extinction. The people of the Indus Valley did not die out. They dispersed, migrated, adapted, and eventually contributed to the cultural mix that would give rise to later civilizations in the Indian subcontinent. Many scholars believe that aspects of Indus Valley culture, including certain religious practices, artistic motifs, and technological traditions, survived in later Indian civilization. But the urban, highly organized, centrally planned society of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro was gone. The cities crumbled, the drains silted up, and the sands of the desert crept over the ruins. For thousands of years, the Indus Valley Civilization was forgotten. It was not until 1921 that archaeologists working for the Archaeological Survey of India began excavations at Harappa and recognized the site as belonging to a previously unknown civilization. Further excavations at Mohenjo-daro, beginning in 1922, confirmed the discovery. Since then, more than 1,000 Indus Valley sites have been identified across a vast area, revealing the full extent of this remarkable civilization. While the Indus Valley Civilization left behind tangible ruins and artifacts that tell at least part of its story, some lost civilizations exist primarily in the realm of legend and speculation. They are civilizations that may or may not have existed, places described in ancient texts and oral traditions that have never been confirmed by archaeological evidence but that continue to captivate the human imagination. The most famous of these legendary lost civilizations is, of course, Atlantis. The story of Atlantis comes from a single source, the Greek philosopher Plato, who described it in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, written around 360 before the Common Era. According to Plato, Atlantis was a powerful island nation located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which most scholars identify as the Strait of Gibraltar. The Atlanteans were wealthy, technologically advanced, and militarily powerful. They ruled over a vast maritime empire and lived in a splendid capital city built on a series of concentric rings of water and land, with magnificent temples, palaces, and harbors. But the Atlanteans became corrupt. Consumed by greed and ambition, they launched a war of conquest against the nations of the Mediterranean. The Athenians, representing the virtues of a just society, defeated the Atlantean invasion. And then, in a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, Atlantis sank beneath the sea and was lost forever. It is a compelling story, and it has been interpreted in countless ways over the centuries. Some have taken it literally, believing that Atlantis was a real place that was destroyed by a natural disaster. Thousands of books, articles, and documentaries have been produced claiming to identify the location of Atlantis, with proposed sites ranging from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean to Antarctica to the coast of West Africa. But most mainstream scholars believe that Plato invented Atlantis as a literary device, a philosophical allegory designed to illustrate his ideas about the dangers of hubris, the corruption of power, and the contrast between a just society and an unjust one. In Plato's dialogues, Atlantis serves as a foil for Athens, representing everything that a society should not be. The story is not history. It is philosophy dressed up as myth. This does not mean that Plato created the story entirely from nothing. He may have drawn on real events for inspiration. The most commonly cited candidate is the eruption of the Thera volcano, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 before the Common Era. This eruption was one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded history, and it devastated the Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. The eruption caused massive tsunamis that struck the coast of Crete and other Aegean islands, and the resulting ashfall and climate disruption may have contributed to the decline of the Minoan palace culture. The destruction of a sophisticated island civilization by a natural catastrophe has obvious parallels with the Atlantis story, and some scholars have argued that the memory of Thera's eruption, transmitted through oral tradition over many centuries, may have inspired Plato's tale. Others have pointed to the sudden destruction of Helike, a Greek city on the Gulf of Corinth that was destroyed by an earthquake and tsunami in 373 before the Common Era, just a few years before Plato wrote the Timaeus and Critias. Helike was submerged beneath the waters of the Gulf, and remained lost for centuries. It is possible that the destruction of Helike, a contemporary event that Plato would certainly have known about, influenced his description of Atlantis sinking beneath the sea. But regardless of its inspiration, the story of Atlantis has taken on a life of its own. It has become a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of lost greatness, a metaphor for the idea that somewhere, somehow, there was once a perfect civilization that we have lost and might, if we are fortunate, find again. The enduring appeal of Atlantis lies not in its historical reality, which is doubtful, but in what it represents, the deep human longing for a golden age, a paradise lost, a better world that existed before things went wrong. Less well known than Atlantis but equally fascinating is the legend of Lemuria, a hypothetical lost continent that was once thought to have existed in the Indian Ocean. The concept of Lemuria originated in the 19th century, not as a myth or legend, but as a scientific hypothesis. In 1864, the English zoologist Philip Sclater published an article in which he proposed the existence of a now-submerged landmass in the Indian Ocean to explain the distribution of lemurs and other animals found in both Madagascar and India but not in Africa or the Middle East. Sclater called this hypothetical landmass Lemuria, after the lemurs that had inspired the idea. At the time, the concept of continental drift had not yet been proposed, and scientists did not understand the mechanism of plate tectonics. The idea of land bridges or sunken continents was a respectable hypothesis for explaining the distribution of species across widely separated landmasses. Other scientists, including the German biologist Ernst Haeckel, embraced and expanded the Lemuria hypothesis. Haeckel went so far as to suggest that Lemuria might have been the original homeland of humanity, the cradle from which our species dispersed across the globe. As the science of geology advanced and the theory of plate tectonics was developed in the 20th century, the scientific basis for Lemuria evaporated. The distribution of lemurs and other species could be explained by continental drift, the movement of tectonic plates over geological time. Madagascar had once been connected to India as part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, and the two landmasses had separated tens of millions of years ago as the plates moved apart. There was no need to invoke a sunken continent. But by the time science abandoned Lemuria, the idea had been adopted by various esoteric and mystical traditions. The Russian occultist Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, incorporated Lemuria into her elaborate cosmological framework, describing it as the homeland of one of the root races of humanity. In Blavatsky's system, the Lemurians were a primitive but spiritually advanced race who inhabited their continent millions of years ago before it was destroyed by volcanic activity. The idea of Lemuria also resonated in Tamil cultural and literary traditions in southern India. Some Tamil scholars and writers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries identified Lemuria with Kumari Kandam, a legendary lost land mentioned in Tamil literature. According to these traditions, Kumari Kandam was a vast continent south of India that was home to an advanced Tamil civilization before it was submerged by the sea. The identification of Kumari Kandam with Lemuria gave the legend a cultural and emotional resonance that transcended the scientific debate. Today, the scientific consensus is clear. There is no evidence for a sunken continent in the Indian Ocean. The geological record does not support it, and the distribution of species can be fully explained by plate tectonics. But the legend of Lemuria persists, sustained by the same impulses that keep the Atlantis story alive, the desire to believe that there was once a great civilization, now lost, that holds the key to understanding our past and our potential. The legends of Atlantis and Lemuria, whatever their basis in reality, point to something important about how we relate to the past. We are drawn to the idea of lost civilizations not just because they are intellectually interesting, but because they speak to something deep in the human psyche. The idea that there were once great societies that have been forgotten, buried, or destroyed resonates with our awareness of our own mortality, both as individuals and as cultures. If mighty Akkad can be lost, if the Hittite Empire can be forgotten, if the cities of the Amazon can be swallowed by the jungle, then what does that say about our own civilizations? Are they any more permanent? This is not a comfortable question. We like to think that our achievements will endure, that our cities, our institutions, our knowledge will survive for future generations. But the archaeological record tells a different story. It tells us that most civilizations eventually fall. Most cities are eventually abandoned. Most cultures are eventually forgotten. The exceptions, the civilizations that we remember, Egypt, Greece, Rome, China, are exceptions precisely because they are unusual. They survived in memory, if not always in fact, because of a combination of factors: durable building materials, written records, cultural continuity, and the luck of being rediscovered by later societies that cared enough to study them. But for every Egypt, there are 100 Epanos, civilizations that flourished and fell and were forgotten, leaving only traces in the earth for future generations to puzzle over. The archaeological record is, by its nature, incomplete. We see only what has survived, and what has survived is a tiny fraction of what once existed. The wooden buildings have rotted. The fabric has decayed. The songs have been silenced. The stories have been forgotten. What remains are the stones, the pottery, the bones, and the earthworks, the durable remnants of lives that were once as rich, as complex, and as full of meaning as our own. And sometimes, what remains is not a city or a temple or a tomb, but an object so extraordinary, so baffling, that it seems to defy explanation. An artifact that does not fit neatly into our understanding of what ancient peoples were capable of. An object that makes us wonder whether the ancients knew more than we give them credit for. High in the Altiplano of Bolivia, at an elevation of nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, lies one of the most puzzling archaeological sites in the world. Tiwanaku, an ancient city near the shores of Lake Titicaca, was the center of a powerful civilization that flourished from roughly 500 to 1000 of the Common Era. At its peak, Tiwanaku may have been home to as many as 40,000 people, and its influence extended across a vast area of the central Andes. But it is not Tiwanaku itself that attracts the most attention and controversy. It is a smaller site located about a kilometer to the southwest, a place called Puma Punku. Puma Punku, whose name means Door of the Puma, in the Aymara language, is a temple complex that consists of a terrace platform and a collection of stone blocks scattered across the site. Many of these blocks are made of red sandstone, quarried from a source about 10 kilometers away. Others are made of andesite, an extremely hard volcanic stone whose nearest source is on the shores of Lake Titicaca, about 90 kilometers distant. What makes Puma Punku extraordinary is the precision of the stonework. The blocks are cut with a level of accuracy that seems almost impossible for a pre-industrial society. Some of the surfaces are so flat that they appear to have been machined. The corners are sharp and precise. The joints between blocks are so tight that a razor blade cannot be inserted between them. Some of the blocks feature complex interlocking shapes, with precisely cut grooves, notches, and recesses that allowed them to fit together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. The H-shaped blocks are particularly remarkable. These are large, flat stones with a distinctive H shape, cut from andesite with extraordinary precision. Each H block has perfectly flat surfaces, uniform dimensions, and sharp, clean edges. The level of craftsmanship required to produce these blocks is astonishing, especially when you consider that the builders of Puma Punku did not have iron or steel tools. Their cutting implements were made of stone and bronze, materials that are significantly softer than andesite. How did they do it? This question has generated intense debate among archaeologists, engineers, and enthusiasts. Some researchers have proposed that the builders used a combination of stone hammers, sand abrasives, and enormous amounts of patient labor to achieve the precision seen at Puma Punku. Experimental archaeology has shown that it is possible to cut and shape hard stone using these techniques, although the process is extremely slow and labor-intensive. Others have pointed out that some of the features at Puma Punku seem to go beyond what can be easily explained by known ancient techniques. The internal angles, the perfectly flat surfaces over large areas, the precisely uniform dimensions of the H blocks, all of these suggest a level of control and consistency that is difficult to achieve with hand tools. Some researchers have speculated that the builders may have used techniques or tools that we have not yet identified, perhaps methods that were lost when the civilization collapsed. And then there are the fringe theories, the suggestions that Puma Punku was built by aliens, or by a lost advanced civilization with technology comparable to our own. These theories are not supported by any credible evidence, and mainstream archaeologists reject them. But they persist, in part because the stonework at Puma Punku is genuinely impressive and difficult to explain, and in part because human beings are naturally drawn to mystery and wonder. The truth is probably more mundane but no less impressive. The builders of Puma Punku were highly skilled craftspeople who developed sophisticated techniques for working stone over many generations. They had access to abundant labor, a well-organized society, and a tradition of stone carving that allowed them to achieve results that seem remarkable to us today. We should not underestimate the ingenuity and capability of ancient peoples simply because we do not immediately understand how they accomplished something. History is full of examples of ancient achievements that seemed impossible until someone figured out the method. What is certain is that Puma Punku, like Tiwanaku itself, was eventually abandoned. The Tiwanaku civilization declined around 1000 of the Common Era, possibly due to a prolonged drought that disrupted agriculture and undermined the social order. The population dispersed, and the monumental centers fell into disrepair. Over the centuries, the blocks of Puma Punku were scattered, some of them carried off by later inhabitants for use in other construction projects. What remains today is a shadow of what once stood there, a collection of scattered stones that hint at a grandeur we can only imagine. From the windswept altiplano of South America, let us travel to the Indian subcontinent once more, this time to encounter an object that is, in its own quiet way, as mysterious as any lost city or vanished empire. Standing in the Quatul Islam Mosque complex in Delhi is a pillar of iron that has stood for more than 1600 years. It is about 7 meters tall, with a diameter of about 40 centimeters at the base. It weighs approximately 6,000 kilograms. And it has barely rusted. The Iron Pillar of Delhi is one of the most remarkable metallurgical artifacts in the world. Iron, as anyone who has seen an old nail or a forgotten tool knows, is prone to rust. When exposed to moisture and oxygen, iron corrodes, forming reddish-brown iron oxide that gradually eats away at the metal. In most environments, an iron object left exposed to the elements will rust significantly within a few years and may be completely corroded within a few decades. The Iron Pillar has been standing in the open air for approximately 1600 years. It has been exposed to monsoon rains, humidity, heat, and all the other environmental conditions that would normally cause rapid corrosion. And yet, its surface shows only a thin layer of rust, far less than would be expected for an iron object of its age and exposure. How is this possible? The answer lies in the composition of the iron and the methods used to produce it. Analysis of the pillar has shown that it is made of wrought iron with an unusually high phosphorus content. The high phosphorus content, combined with the specific techniques used to forge the pillar, created a protective layer of iron hydrogen phosphate on the surface of the metal. This layer, which forms over time through a process of passivation, acts as a barrier against further corrosion, effectively sealing the iron from the moisture and oxygen that would cause it to rust. The pillar also has a remarkably low sulfur content, which contributes to its corrosion resistance. Sulfur is a common impurity in iron, and it promotes corrosion. The low sulfur content of the Delhi pillar suggests that the ironsmiths who made it had developed techniques for producing unusually pure iron, either through careful selection of ore or through specific smelting and forging processes. The implications are significant. The Iron Pillar demonstrates that ancient Indian metallurgists had achieved a level of skill and understanding that was, in some respects, ahead of their time. They had produced a large iron object with specific compositional characteristics that gave it exceptional durability, and they had done so more than 1,000 years before modern metallurgical science would begin to understand the principles involved. The pillar bears an inscription in Sanskrit that attributes its erection to a king named Chandra, who is generally identified as Chandragupta II of the Gupta dynasty, who reigned from about 380 to 415 of the Common Era. The inscription describes the pillar as a flagstaff erected in honor of the Hindu god Vishnu on a hill called Vishnupada. The pillar was apparently moved to its current location in Delhi at some point in the medieval period, possibly by one of the Delhi sultans. The Iron Pillar is not just a metallurgical curiosity. It is a testament to the knowledge and skill of ancient craftspeople, a reminder that technological sophistication is not the exclusive property of the modern world. The ironsmiths who made this pillar understood their materials in ways that we are only now beginning to appreciate. They may not have known the chemistry of passivation or the role of phosphorus in corrosion resistance, but they had developed practical techniques, honed over generations of trial and error, that achieved the same results. The Iron Pillar stands as a quiet challenge to our assumptions about the ancient world. We tend to think of technological progress as a linear process, a steady march from primitive to advanced, from simple to complex. But the reality is more complicated. Knowledge can be gained and lost. Techniques can be developed and forgotten. Skills that took generations to perfect can disappear in a single generation if the chain of transmission is broken. This is one of the most sobering lessons of the lost civilizations we have been exploring. When a society collapses, it does not just lose its buildings and its population. It loses its knowledge. The techniques for working stone at Puma Punku, the engineering skills that built the drainage systems of Mohenjo-Daro, the metallurgical expertise that produced the Iron Pillar, all of these represent accumulated knowledge that was the product of centuries of experience and refinement. When the societies that possessed this knowledge disappeared, the knowledge went with them. Sometimes the knowledge was partially preserved, passed down in diminished form through oral traditions or practical skills. But often it was simply lost, vanishing as completely as the cities that had produced it. The rediscovery of these lost techniques is one of the great challenges and pleasures of archaeology. Each artifact, each ruin, each fragment of ancient technology is a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, reveals the extraordinary ingenuity and creativity of our ancestors. As we reflect on these lost civilizations, from the megacities of the Amazon to the forgotten empire of the Hittites, from the silent cities of the Indus Valley to the precision stonework of Puma Punku, we begin to see a pattern. Not a pattern of failure, though failure is certainly part of the story, but a pattern of ambition. Every one of these civilizations was, in its own way, reaching for something extraordinary. They were building cities in jungles, forging empires across deserts, engineering landscapes in floodplains, and crafting objects of astonishing beauty and precision. They were pushing the boundaries of what was possible with the materials and knowledge available to them. And they were doing it long before the civilizations we typically think of as great had even begun. The Upano complex was thriving while Rome was still a collection of mud huts on the banks of the Tiber. The Indus Valley Civilization had running water and covered drains while most of Europe was still in the Neolithic. The Hittites were forging iron and writing peace treaties while the Greeks were still centuries away from their golden age. This is not to diminish the achievements of Greece, Rome, Egypt, or any other well-known civilization. It is simply to point out that the story of human civilization is far bigger, far more varied, and far more impressive than the version most of us learned in school. The cradles of civilization that we were taught about, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, were not the only places where complex societies arose. They were simply the ones that happened to be rediscovered first, or that happened to leave the most durable traces, or that happened to be located in regions where later civilizations took an interest in the past. The true story of civilization is global. It encompasses every continent except Antarctica. It includes societies that built in stone and societies that built in wood. Societies that wrote and societies that did not. Societies that left monuments and societies that left only subtle traces in the earth. Every one of them contributed to the human story. Every one of them had something to teach us. And the story is far from over. New discoveries are being made every year. LiDAR is revealing hidden cities across the tropics. Satellite imagery is identifying archaeological sites in deserts and grasslands. DNA analysis is rewriting the story of human migration and interaction. Climate science is illuminating the environmental pressures that shaped the rise and fall of ancient societies. We are living in a golden age of archaeological discovery, a time when the tools at our disposal allow us to see the ancient world more clearly than ever before. But for every question that is answered, new questions arise. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we do not know. The ancient world was vast and complex, and we have only scratched its surface. There are cities still buried, languages still undeciphered, technologies still unexplained, and stories still untold. The past is not dead. It is not even past. It is alive, waiting beneath the earth, beneath the sea, beneath the canopy of the forest, for someone to come and find it. What stories will emerge next? What lost civilizations will be rediscovered? What assumptions will be overturned? We cannot know. But we can be certain that the discoveries will come, and that they will be extraordinary. The story of how civilizations vanish is never simple. There is no single mechanism, no universal explanation, no neat formula that predicts when a society will thrive and when it will fall. Each collapse is unique, shaped by the specific geography, climate, culture, and history of the society in question. And yet, when we look across the many examples of civilizational collapse, certain themes recur with unsettling regularity. One of the most important of these themes is the relationship between civilization and environment. Every civilization depends on its environment for the basic necessities of life: food, water, building materials, fuel. When the environment changes, whether through natural climate shifts, human-caused degradation, or some combination of the two, the foundations of the civilization are shaken. If the society can adapt, it survives. If it cannot, it declines. We have already seen how environmental change may have contributed to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, the decline of the Indus Valley Civilization, and the abandonment of the Maya lowland cities. In each case, drought played a significant role, reducing agricultural productivity and undermining the food systems that sustained large populations. But drought alone was rarely sufficient to destroy a civilization. It was the interaction of drought with other factors, warfare, social inequality, political instability, overexploitation of resources, that tipped the balance from stress to collapse. This interaction is what makes civilizational collapse so difficult to predict and so frightening to contemplate. A society can withstand any one of these pressures individually. It is when they combine, when drought coincides with war, when social inequality deepens during a time of resource scarcity, when political leaders lose legitimacy just when strong leadership is most needed, that the system breaks down. The collapse is not caused by any single factor. It is caused by the failure of the system as a whole to cope with the accumulated pressures. The Bronze Age collapse, which destroyed the Hittite Empire and disrupted civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean, is perhaps the most dramatic example of this kind of systems collapse. The civilizations of the Late Bronze Age were highly interconnected, linked by networks of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. This interconnection was a source of strength, allowing each civilization to access resources and ideas from across a wide area. But it was also a source of vulnerability. When one part of the network failed, the effects rippled outward, disrupting the entire system. The Late Bronze Age trade networks depended on a few key resources, particularly tin, which was essential for making bronze. Tin was not widely available in the eastern Mediterranean, and it had to be imported from distant sources, possibly Afghanistan, Central Asia, or Cornwall in Britain. When these trade routes were disrupted, whether by warfare, piracy, or political instability, the supply of tin dried up, and the entire bronze-based economy was threatened. The arrival of the Sea Peoples, a loose confederation of raiders and migrants whose exact origins remain mysterious, added another layer of disruption. The Sea Peoples attacked coastal cities across the eastern Mediterranean, destroying some of the major trading hubs and disrupting the maritime commerce that was the lifeblood of the Bronze Age economy. Egyptian records describe desperate battles against the Sea Peoples, and the pharaoh Ramesses III claimed to have defeated them in a great naval battle around 1178 before the Common Era. But even Egypt was weakened by the conflict, and the new kingdom never fully recovered. The combination of drought, trade disruption, Sea Peoples attacks, and internal instability proved too much for the Bronze Age civilizations to withstand. One by one they collapsed. The Hittite Empire fell. The Mycenaean palaces burned. The great trading city of Ugarit on the Syrian coast was destroyed and never rebuilt. The last letter found at Ugarit, written by the city's king to the king of the nearby island of Cyprus, is a desperate plea for help. "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came here, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hittite, and all my ships are in the land of Lukka? Thus the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it, the 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us." The help never came. Ugarit was destroyed. And the world that had produced it, the interconnected, cosmopolitan world of the Late Bronze Age, was gone. The parallels between the Bronze Age collapse and the challenges facing our own interconnected world are difficult to ignore. We too live in a world of complex, interdependent systems, global trade networks, international supply chains, shared technologies, and interconnected economies. We too depend on resources that must be transported across great distances. We too face the threat of climate change, resource depletion, and social instability. The Bronze Age collapse is not a prediction of our future, but it is a warning. It shows us what can happen when complex systems fail, and it reminds us that complexity and interconnection, while sources of great strength, can also be sources of great vulnerability. But the Bronze Age collapse also shows us something else. It shows us resilience. The collapse was devastating, but it was not the end of civilization. In the centuries that followed, new societies emerged from the ruins of the old. The Phoenicians developed an alphabetic writing system that would become the ancestor of virtually all modern alphabets. The Greeks, emerging from their own dark age, laid the foundations for Western philosophy, science, and democracy. The Israelites consolidated their identity and produced some of the most influential religious texts in human history. The Iron Age, which followed the Bronze Age collapse, saw the widespread adoption of iron technology, making metal tools and weapons cheaper and more widely available than ever before. The collapse was not the end. It was a transition. A painful, destructive, traumatic transition, to be sure, but a transition nonetheless. The old world died, and a new world was born from its ashes. This pattern, destruction followed by renewal, collapse followed by emergence, is one of the defining rhythms of human history. Civilizations rise and fall, but civilization itself endures. We have traveled far in this journey, from the hidden cities of the Amazon to the burned palaces of the Bronze Age Mediterranean, from the silent streets of Mohenjo-Daro to the scattered stones of Puma Punku. We have encountered civilizations that were forgotten for millennia and technologies that defy easy explanation. We have seen how the tools of modern science, LiDAR, satellite imagery, climate analysis, DNA studies, are opening new windows onto the ancient past, revealing a world that is far more complex, far more interconnected, and far more surprising than we ever imagined. But we have only begun. There are more stories to tell, more mysteries to explore, more lost worlds to discover. The Earth still holds its secrets, and the work of uncovering them continues. Every year, new discoveries push back the boundaries of what we know and challenge the assumptions we have held. The past is not a fixed, settled thing. It is a living, evolving narrative, constantly being rewritten as new evidence comes to light. In the continuation of this journey, we will delve deeper into the mysteries that remain. We will explore the technologies that baffle modern engineers, the legends that may hold kernels of truth, and the questions that still have no answers. We will travel to places where the boundary between history and myth grows thin, where the evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive, where the truth may be stranger than anything we have imagined. The lost civilizations of the past are not just historical curiosities. They are mirrors, reflecting back to us our own strengths and vulnerabilities, our own capacity for greatness and our own potential for destruction. They remind us that we are part of a much longer story, a story that began long before us and will continue long after we are gone. The Earth remembers, even when we forget. And sometimes, if we listen carefully enough, if we dig deep enough, if we look closely enough, the Earth will tell us what it remembers. The story continues. Welcome back to our journey through the shadows of forgotten worlds. In the first part of this exploration, we uncovered massive cities hidden beneath jungles, forgotten empires that once rivaled the greatest powers of the ancient world, and technologies that continue to baffle modern scientists. But we have only scratched the surface. The Earth still holds far deeper secrets, and some of them are more mysterious, more troubling, and more astonishing than anything we have discussed so far. Now we descend deeper into the mystery. We will travel to places where the boundary between history and legend grows thin, where the evidence is tantalizing but incomplete, where the questions outnumber the answers. We will encounter civilizations that seem to have possessed knowledge they should not have had, artifacts that should not exist, and stories that echo across continents in ways that defy easy explanation. The past is not what we thought it was. And by the time we reach the end of this journey, you may find yourself looking at human history in a very different way. Let us begin with a place that has haunted the imagination of scholars, mystics, and dreamers for more than 2,000 years. A place that Plato described in such detail that it feels real, and yet has never been found. A place whose very name has become synonymous with lost greatness, with forgotten glory, with the tantalizing possibility that somewhere out there, buried beneath the waves or the sands or the ice, lies the answer to one of humanity's oldest questions. Atlantis. We touched briefly on the Atlantis legend in the first part of this documentary, but the story deserves a much deeper examination. Because whether or not Atlantis was a real place, the search for it has driven some of the most remarkable and eccentric expeditions in the history of exploration, and it has revealed genuine archaeological wonders along the way. Plato's account of Atlantis is our only ancient source for the legend. In the Timaeus, written around 360 before the Common Era, Plato has one of his characters, the Athenian statesman Critias, recount a story that had supposedly been passed down from Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver, who had heard it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. According to this account, some 9,000 years before Solon's time, meaning around 9600 before the Common Era, there existed a great island empire in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Heracles. This is a crucial detail. Plato does not describe Atlantis as a small island or a regional power. He describes it as a continent larger than Libya and Asia combined, ruling over other islands and parts of the opposite continent. Its capital city was built on a series of concentric rings of land and water, with elaborate canals, magnificent temples, and massive fortifications. The Atlanteans were rich beyond measure, possessing gold, silver, and a mysterious metal called orichalcum that shone like fire. But wealth and power corrupted them. The Atlanteans became greedy and ambitious, launching wars of conquest against the peoples of the Mediterranean. The Athenians, according to Plato, led the resistance and eventually defeated the Atlantean invasion. And then, in a single terrible day and night, Atlantis was destroyed by earthquakes and floods, sinking beneath the sea and disappearing forever. The details Plato provides are so specific, so elaborate, that they have convinced generations of readers that he must have been describing a real place. The measurements of the capital city, the layout of the harbors, the political organization of the 10 kings who ruled the empire, all of these are described with an almost obsessive precision. Why would Plato invent such details if he were merely constructing an allegory? The answer, according to most classical scholars, is that Plato was using the techniques of ancient rhetoric to make his philosophical arguments more compelling. By presenting Atlantis as a historical account, complete with genealogies, geographical details, and specific dates, Plato gave his story an air of authenticity that made it more persuasive as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and imperial ambition. The Atlantis story appears in dialogues that are explicitly philosophical, and it is contrasted with an equally fictional account of an ancient Athens that embodied Plato's ideal republic. Atlantis represents everything Plato thought a society should not be: arrogant, materialistic, expansionist, while ancient Athens represents his vision of a just and harmonious society. But even if Plato invented the story, he may have drawn on real events for inspiration. The most compelling candidate remains the eruption of the Thera volcano, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 before the Common Era. This eruption was one of the most powerful volcanic events in the last 10,000 years of Earth's history, releasing an estimated 60 cubic kilometers of magma and creating a caldera that is still visible today. The eruption devastated the Minoan settlement of Antikythera itself, which was buried under meters of volcanic ash and preserved in remarkable detail, much like Pompeii would be more than 1,500 years later. But the effects of the eruption reached far beyond Thera. Massive tsunamis, generated by the collapse of the caldera, struck the coasts of nearby Crete, the center of the Minoan civilization. Archaeological evidence at coastal Minoan sites shows destruction consistent with tsunami damage, and the eruption is believed to have contributed to the decline of the Minoan palace culture over the following decades. The Minoans were a remarkable civilization. Based on the island of Crete, they developed a sophisticated urban culture with elaborate palaces, beautiful art, and an extensive maritime trade network. The Palace of Knossos, with its complex layout, colorful frescoes, and advanced plumbing, was the largest and most impressive Bronze Age structure in the Aegean. The Minoans developed writing systems, including the still undeciphered linear script, and they influenced cultures throughout the eastern Mediterranean. If the memory of the Minoan civilization, and its dramatic destruction by the Thera eruption, had been transmitted through oral tradition for 1,000 years before reaching Plato, it is easy to see how the story might have been transformed. The Minoans could have become the Atlanteans, their island home expanded into a vast continent, and their destruction attributed to divine punishment for hubris. The dates would have been distorted, with the 900 years between the Thera eruption and Plato's time perhaps growing into the 9,000 years mentioned in his account through a translation error, either by Plato himself or by his sources. This is speculation, of course. We cannot prove that Plato was thinking of the Minoans when he wrote about Atlantis. But the parallels are striking, and the Minoan theory remains one of the most plausible explanations for the origins of the Atlantis legend. Other candidates for the historical Atlantis have been proposed over the years. Some researchers have pointed to the sudden destruction of Helike, a Greek city on the Gulf of Corinth that was destroyed by an earthquake and tsunami in 373 before the Common Era, just a few years before Plato wrote his dialogues. Helike was a wealthy and important city, and its destruction, complete with its submersion beneath the waters of the Gulf, would have been fresh in the minds of Plato's contemporaries. The fate of Helike may have provided a more immediate inspiration for the imagery of Atlantis sinking beneath the sea. Still others have suggested more exotic locations for Atlantis, including the Azores in the mid-Atlantic, the Bahamas, Antarctica, Ireland, Sweden, Malta, and various sites in the Mediterranean. None of these theories has produced credible evidence, and most are based on questionable interpretations of Plato's text combined with wishful thinking. The Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a formation of stones on the sea floor that some Atlantis enthusiasts have claimed is a man-made structure, is actually a natural geological feature, as demonstrated by multiple scientific studies. The pyramids that some claim exist beneath the Atlantic near the Azores have never been confirmed to exist. But the search continues. Every few years, a new expedition, a new theory, a new claim to have discovered the lost continent. The dream of Atlantis refuses to die, in part because it speaks to something deep in the human psyche, the longing for a golden age, the belief that somewhere, sometime, there was a civilization that had achieved what we have not, and that its rediscovery would unlock secrets that could transform our world. The truth is probably much less dramatic. Atlantis, as Plato described it, almost certainly never existed. But the story continues to inspire genuine archaeological research, and along the way, we have discovered many other lost civilizations that, while less spectacular than Plato's imagination, are no less remarkable in their own right. The search for Atlantis has also given rise to another persistent legend, one that connects to real geological and biological science in unexpected ways. The legend of Lemuria, the lost continent of the Indian Ocean, has a fascinating history that spans science, mysticism, and cultural identity. As we discussed briefly in the first part of this documentary, the Lemuria hypothesis was originally proposed in the 19th century as a scientific attempt to explain the distribution of certain species. The English zoologist Philip Sclater noted that lemurs, a group of primates found today only on the island of Madagascar, showed close relationships to species found in India and Southeast Asia. Sclater proposed that these regions had once been connected by a landmass in the Indian Ocean, which had subsequently sunk beneath the waves. Other scientists took up the idea. Ernst Haeckel, one of the most influential biologists of the 19th century, suggested that Lemuria might have been the original homeland of humanity, the cradle from which our species had dispersed to other continents. Haeckel's ideas were speculative, but they were taken seriously by many scientists of his time, who were struggling to understand the geographical distribution of species and the origins of human beings. The Lemuria hypothesis remained scientifically respectable until the mid-20th century, when the theory of plate tectonics was developed and accepted. Plate tectonics provided a coherent explanation for the distribution of species and geological features across the world's continents. According to this theory, the continents are not fixed in place but move slowly across the surface of the Earth, driven by convection currents in the underlying mantle. Continents that are now widely separated were once joined together, and the distribution of species can be explained by the ancient connections between land masses. For the case of the lemurs, plate tectonics offered a clear explanation. Madagascar and India were once part of the supercontinent Gondwana, along with Africa, South America, Antarctica, and Australia. As Gondwana broke apart during the Mesozoic era, Madagascar and India drifted away from Africa. India moved northward, eventually colliding with Asia and pushing up the Himalayan mountains, while Madagascar remained relatively close to Africa. The lemurs and their relatives had evolved on the ancient continent before it broke apart, which is why their descendants are now found in the widely separated locations of Madagascar, India, and Southeast Asia. With plate tectonics providing a complete explanation, the Lemuria hypothesis was no longer needed. It was quietly abandoned by mainstream science. But by then, the idea had escaped the confines of scientific discourse and taken on a life of its own in the realms of occultism, mysticism, and cultural tradition. The Russian occultist Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society in the 1870s, incorporated Lemuria into her elaborate esoteric cosmology. According to Blavatsky, Lemuria was the home of one of the 7 root races of humanity, a race of giant, spiritually advanced beings who had inhabited their continent millions of years ago before being destroyed by volcanic cataclysms. The Lemurians, in Blavatsky's account, possessed extraordinary psychic and spiritual powers, and their civilization had been the source of much ancient wisdom. Blavatsky's account was pure invention, unsupported by any evidence. But it captured the imagination of many people in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and it influenced various New Age and esoteric movements that continue to this day. The idea of Lemuria as a lost paradise, a place of spiritual advancement and mystical knowledge, has become firmly embedded in certain strands of alternative thought. Meanwhile, in southern India, the Lemuria legend found unexpected resonance with an ancient Tamil literary tradition. Tamil literature refers to a lost land called Kumari Kandam, described as a vast continent that once existed south of India before being submerged by the sea. According to Tamil tradition, Kumari Kandam was the original homeland of the Tamil people and the site of the first 2 great academies of Tamil literature, which produced works of extraordinary beauty and wisdom. The identification of Kumari Kandam with Lemuria, made by Tamil scholars in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, gave the Tamil legend a certain scientific respectability while providing a cultural framework for the Lemuria idea. For some Tamil nationalists, Kumari Kandam represents the ancient origins of Tamil civilization and its status as one of the oldest cultures on Earth. The submerged continent, in this view, is not just a myth but a historical reality, and its rediscovery would validate Tamil cultural pride. The scientific evidence, unfortunately for those who wish it were true, does not support the existence of a sunken continent south of India. The geology of the Indian Ocean is well understood, and there is no evidence of a large landmass that sank in recent geological time. The sea floor south of India shows the expected features of oceanic crust, formed at mid-ocean ridges and gradually moving away from them, with no signs of a submerged continental fragment. However, there is a kernel of truth in the Kumari Kandam legend. During the last ice age, when large amounts of water were locked up in glaciers, sea levels were significantly lower than they are today, perhaps 120 meters or more below current levels. This exposed large areas of continental shelf that are now underwater, including areas around the coasts of India. As the ice age ended and sea levels rose, these areas were gradually flooded, submerging any human settlements that had existed on them. Recent underwater archaeological investigations off the coast of India have revealed intriguing evidence of ancient settlements now beneath the sea. In the Gulf of Khambat, off the western coast of India, sonar surveys have detected structures that some researchers have interpreted as the remains of a submerged city. The claims are controversial, and many mainstream archaeologists remain skeptical, but the possibility that ancient coastal settlements were flooded by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age is entirely plausible. If such settlements existed, they would not have been vast lost continents, but they might have been substantial coastal communities that developed during a period of lower sea levels. Their submergence, occurring gradually over thousands of years, might have given rise to legends of lost lands and drowned civilizations. In this sense, the Kumari Kandam legend, and by extension the Lemuria legend, might reflect a genuine historical memory of communities lost to rising seas. The connection between sea level changes and ancient civilizations opens up one of the most fascinating and least explored areas of archaeology. What did the coastlines of the world look like during the last ice age, and what human activities took place on the land that is now beneath the waves. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, was accompanied by dramatic changes in the Earth's environment. Global temperatures rose, glaciers melted, and sea levels rose by more than 100 meters over the course of several thousand years. This is not a slow, imperceptible change. Even a gradual rise of a centimeter or two per year would have been noticeable within a single human lifetime, and there were periods when the rise was much more rapid. The coastlines during the Ice Age were significantly different from today. Britain was connected to the European mainland by a vast plain now known as Doggerland, which is beneath the North Sea. The Persian Gulf was a river valley, not a sea, watered by the ancestors of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Southeast Asia included a huge landmass called Sundaland, which encompassed what are now the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. The Beringia land bridge connected Alaska to Siberia, allowing the first humans to cross into the Americas. All of these areas were habitable during the Ice Age, and there is growing evidence that they were inhabited. Doggerland, in particular, has yielded fascinating archaeological finds. Fishermen working the North Sea have periodically dredged up ancient artifacts, including stone tools, bone implements, and even fossilized human remains. These finds indicate that Doggerland was home to a substantial population of hunter-gatherers who lived off the rich resources of the plains, rivers, and coastal areas. As sea levels rose, Doggerland was gradually submerged. Its inhabitants would have watched as their world slowly disappeared beneath the waves. Coastal villages were flooded, hunting grounds became lagoons, and the vast plain shrunk to a series of islands before finally vanishing entirely around 8,200 years ago. The people who had lived there would have migrated to the higher ground of Britain and continental Europe, taking their memories and traditions with them. Similar stories played out around the world. Sundaland's coastal populations retreated as the seas rose, and their descendants became the peoples of the modern Indonesian and Philippine archipelagos. In the Persian Gulf region, the rising seas transformed a fertile river valley into a shallow sea, displacing whatever populations had lived there. In the Americas, coastal populations along the Pacific coast would have watched their beaches recede and their fishing grounds change. Some researchers have speculated that these submerged landscapes might contain evidence of civilizations more advanced than we have imagined. Graham Hancock, a controversial writer whose theories are rejected by mainstream archaeology, has proposed that a sophisticated maritime civilization existed during the Ice Age and was largely destroyed by rising sea levels. According to Hancock, the survivors spread their knowledge to hunter-gatherer populations around the world, giving rise to the sudden appearance of agriculture, monumental architecture, and other markers of civilization in various places within a relatively short time span. Mainstream archaeologists reject these claims, pointing out that there is no direct evidence for a sophisticated Ice Age civilization and that the development of agriculture and other features of civilization can be explained without invoking a lost precursor culture. However, they acknowledge that our knowledge of Ice Age human populations is limited, and that there is much still to be discovered about the peoples who lived on the now submerged coastlines. Underwater archaeology is a challenging and expensive discipline, but it is beginning to yield remarkable results. Off the coast of Israel, near the modern city of Haifa, a 9,000-year-old Neolithic village has been excavated at the site called Hittite Empire. The village, which is now submerged in about 10 meters of water, contains well-preserved houses, wells, and even a structure that appears to be a ceremonial center made of upright stones. The site was inhabited during a period when the sea level was rising, and it was eventually abandoned as the waters advanced. Hittite Empire is not evidence of a lost advanced civilization, but it demonstrates that early Neolithic communities were living in coastal areas that are now underwater, and that their remains can be preserved and studied if we know where to look. Similar sites almost certainly exist in many other parts of the world, waiting to be discovered. Let us now turn our attention to another mystery, one that connects to the broader question of what ancient peoples knew and how they knew it. Across the world, from Egypt to Peru, from Cambodia to Britain, ancient civilizations built structures that display remarkable astronomical alignments. Their monuments were oriented to the rising and setting of the sun at the solstices and equinoxes, to the positions of specific stars, to the movements of the moon and planets. This knowledge of astronomy was widespread, precise, and often incorporated into the very architecture of ancient societies. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built around 2560 before the Common Era during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, the Great Pyramid is aligned with astonishing precision to the cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west. The alignment is accurate to within a small fraction of a degree, a level of precision that is difficult to achieve even with modern instruments. How the ancient Egyptians managed this feat, without magnetic compasses or telescopes, remains a subject of active research. Various theories have been proposed. Some researchers have suggested that the Egyptians used the position of certain stars, observing them at specific moments in their nightly arcs to determine true north. Others have proposed methods involving the sun and shadows cast by vertical poles. All of these methods can achieve high precision if applied carefully, but they require considerable expertise and patient observation over long periods. The internal structure of the Great Pyramid is also aligned to celestial phenomena. Narrow shafts extending from the king's chamber and the queen's chamber point to specific stars in the northern and southern skies. The southern shaft of the king's chamber points toward the constellation Orion, specifically toward the belt star Alnitak. The northern shaft points toward the pole star of the era, which was not Polaris but rather Thuban in the constellation Draco. These alignments suggest that the pyramid was designed with careful attention to the sky and its role in Egyptian cosmology. Egypt is not unique in this regard. The temples of Karnak, also in Egypt, are aligned to the rising sun at the winter solstice. The great Aztec temple of the sun at Teotihuacan is aligned to specific astronomical events. The Mayan observatory at Chichen Itza allowed for precise observations of Venus and other celestial bodies. The Angkor Temple complex in Cambodia contains structures aligned to the solstices and equinoxes, with entire architectural features designed to interact with the sun's rays at specific times of the year. In Britain, the megalithic monument of Stonehenge, built in stages between about 3000 and 1500 before the Common Era, incorporates striking astronomical alignments. The main axis of Stonehenge points toward the sunrise at the summer solstice and the sunset at the winter solstice. Other alignments have been identified for lunar events and possibly for the movements of certain stars. Stonehenge was clearly a place of astronomical observation as well as ritual significance, though the exact nature of the observations and their purposes remain debated. But perhaps the most impressive example of ancient astronomical knowledge comes from a site that predates all of these by thousands of years. Göbekli Tepe, in southeastern Turkey, is one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries of the past century. Located on a hilltop overlooking the plains of ancient Mesopotamia, Göbekli Tepe consists of a series of circular enclosures built from massive T-shaped stone pillars, some standing more than 5 meters tall and weighing many tons. What makes Göbekli Tepe so remarkable is its age. The site dates to approximately 9600 before the Common Era, more than 6,000 years before the Great Pyramid, more than 5,000 years before Stonehenge, and thousands of years before what we thought were the earliest complex societies. When Göbekli Tepe was built, human beings were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers, incapable of the social organization required to construct monumental architecture. And yet Göbekli Tepe exists. Its massive pillars are decorated with detailed carvings of animals, birds, and other creatures. Foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, lions, and various birds appear in the reliefs, along with abstract symbols whose meaning we can only guess at. The precision of the carvings and the sophistication of the design suggest that the builders were skilled artisans working within an established artistic tradition. The construction of Göbekli Tepe required the mobilization of hundreds of workers, the quarrying and transportation of massive stones, and the coordination of complex construction activities. This kind of project implies a level of social organization that we did not think existed at the time. It suggests that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of much more than we had assumed, and it raises fundamental questions about the origins of civilization itself. One of the most influential theories about Göbekli Tepe proposed by the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who first excavated the site, is that it turns the traditional narrative of civilization on its head. Instead of agriculture leading to settled communities which then led to religion and monumental architecture, Schmidt proposed that religion and communal ritual came first. According to this theory, the desire to build and maintain monumental religious centers like Göbekli Tepe drove hunter-gatherer societies to develop new economic and social systems, including agriculture, to support the labor and resources required. This idea is revolutionary. It suggests that the first great human construction projects were built not for practical purposes but for spiritual ones, and that the material transformations that we call civilization emerged as a byproduct of religious and cultural developments. If Schmidt was right, then civilization did not begin with the plow. It began with the temple. The astronomical alignments at Göbekli Tepe are another source of fascination. Some researchers have proposed that certain pillars are aligned to the positions of specific stars, and that the carvings on the pillars may represent constellations. If these interpretations are correct, then the builders of Göbekli Tepe were not only capable of monumental construction but also had a sophisticated understanding of the sky. They were, in effect, ancient astronomers, tracking the movements of celestial bodies and incorporating their observations into their architecture. One particularly intriguing theory involves Pillar 43, sometimes called the vulture stone, which features carvings of birds, animals, and abstract symbols. Some researchers have interpreted these carvings as representing a specific astronomical event, possibly a comet impact that occurred around 10,800 before the Common Era. This impact, sometimes called the Younger Dryas impact, has been hypothesized to have caused the sudden cooling of the Earth's climate at the end of the last ice age, leading to dramatic environmental changes and possibly to the collapse of any advanced ice age civilizations that might have existed. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is controversial, and the interpretation of the vulture stone as commemorating this event is even more so. Mainstream archaeologists are generally skeptical of these interpretations, arguing that they read too much into the carvings and rely on speculative connections between different fields of evidence. But the fact that such interpretations are even possible, that Göbekli Tepe is complex and sophisticated enough to invite them, is itself a testament to the extraordinary nature of the site. Göbekli Tepe has forced archaeologists to reconsider many of their assumptions about the origins of civilization. It has pushed back the date for monumental architecture by thousands of years. It has demonstrated that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of more than we had thought. And it has raised the possibility that our timeline for the emergence of complex human societies may need significant revision. Related to Göbekli Tepe, and equally mysterious, is another site in Turkey called Karahan Tepe. Located about 35 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe is a similarly ancient site with its own set of megalithic structures and carved pillars. Excavations at Karahan Tepe have only recently begun in earnest, and the results are already reshaping our understanding of the ancient Near East. Karahan Tepe is roughly contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, dating to around 9500 before the Common Era. It features numerous T-shaped pillars similar to those at Göbekli Tepe, along with unique elements like a series of 11 phallic pillars arranged in a circular chamber, and a striking carved head that emerges from a wall as if watching over the space. The site's function remains uncertain, but it clearly serves some kind of ritual or ceremonial purpose. The discovery of Karahan Tepe, along with other sites in the region such as Navali Kori and Seferd Tepe, indicates that there was a widespread cultural tradition in ancient Anatolia during the early Neolithic period. This was not an isolated phenomenon centered on a single site. It was a regional culture that produced multiple monumental centers, each with its own distinctive features but sharing certain fundamental characteristics. The builders of these sites were part of a broader community that maintained connections across a wide area. This raises the question of what happened to this early monumental tradition. Göbekli Tepe was eventually abandoned, and the enclosures were deliberately buried, apparently as part of a ritual closure. Why did this culture stop building such structures? Did the builders simply lose interest, or was there a broader social change that led to the abandonment of the tradition? The answers remain elusive, and the questions themselves point to how much we still have to learn about the early stages of human civilization. We have talked about civilizations that vanished, cities that were lost, and monuments that continue to puzzle us. But we have not yet talked about one of the greatest mysteries of all, a mystery that touches on the very origins of writing, the fundamental technology that allows civilizations to record their achievements and transmit their knowledge across generations. Writing is one of the most important inventions in human history. Without writing, complex civilizations as we know them would not be possible. Writing allows for the accumulation of knowledge over time, the maintenance of legal codes and administrative records, the transmission of literature and religious teachings, and the coordination of activities across large distances. It is, in many ways, the technology that makes civilization possible. But writing was not invented once. It was invented independently in several different places around the world, at different times and using different systems. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia developed cuneiform writing around 3200 before the Common Era. The Egyptians developed hieroglyphics around the same time. The Chinese developed their own writing system, which is the ancestor of modern Chinese characters, around 1300 before the Common Era. The Maya developed their glyphic writing system around 300 before the Common Era. But there are also writing systems that were used by ancient civilizations but that have never been deciphered. These undeciphered scripts represent lost voices, silent testimonies from cultures we cannot fully understand because we cannot read what they wrote. We have already discussed the Indus script, the writing system used by the Indus Valley Civilization. Despite more than a century of effort, no one has been able to decipher it. The problem is compounded by the brevity of the inscriptions, most of which are only a few signs long, and by the lack of bilingual texts that could serve as a Rosetta Stone. Some scholars have even questioned whether the Indus script is a true writing system at all, or whether it might be a system of symbols or emblems that does not encode language in the way that true scripts do. This is a minority view, but it illustrates how uncertain our understanding of the Indus script really is. Another undeciphered script is Linear A, used by the Minoan civilization of Crete during the second millennium before the Common Era. Linear A has been found on hundreds of clay tablets and other objects, and it is clearly related to the later Linear B script, which was used to write an early form of Greek and which was successfully deciphered in 1952. But Linear A remains stubbornly opaque. It appears to record a language that is not related to Greek or any other known language family, and without a bilingual text or a related known language, decipherment has proven impossible. The Rongorongo script of Easter Island is another mystery. Rongorongo is a system of glyphs found on wooden tablets and other objects from Easter Island, the remote Pacific island famous for its massive stone statues. The script consists of hundreds of distinct signs, including human figures, animals, plants, and abstract symbols. Whether Rongorongo is a true writing system that records language, or a mnemonic system that helps priests or storytellers remember important information, is still debated. Even the direction in which it should be read has been contested. The population of Easter Island collapsed dramatically in the 18th and 19th centuries due to disease, slave raiding, and other disasters, and much of the traditional knowledge about Rongorongo was lost. Today, we can look at the beautifully carved glyphs, but we cannot know for certain what they mean. Then there is the Voynich manuscript, though this is not technically ancient. The Voynich manuscript is a mysterious book written in an unknown script and illustrated with strange botanical, astronomical, and biological images. It dates to the early 15th century of the Common Era, and despite intense study by cryptographers, linguists, and historians, its meaning remains unknown. It may be an elaborate hoax, a coded text in a known language, a text in an unknown language, or something else entirely. The Voynich manuscript demonstrates that mysteries of language and writing are not confined to the ancient past. Each of these undeciphered scripts represents a lost world. When we cannot read a civilization's writing, we cannot hear their voices, cannot know their thoughts, cannot understand their beliefs and stories in their own words. We are reduced to studying them as if through a soundproof glass, seeing their artifacts and their buildings but unable to hear what they are telling us. The successful decipherment of some ancient scripts has revealed the extraordinary richness that awaits us when we can finally read what an ancient civilization has written. The decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics by Champollion in the 1820s opened up thousands of years of Egyptian history, literature, and religious thought. The decipherment of Mayan hieroglyphics in the 20th century revealed a rich historical record of Maya kings, wars, alliances, and religious beliefs, transforming our understanding of Maya civilization from a mysterious culture of astronomer priests into a dynamic and often violent world of competing city-states. What might we learn if we could read the Indus script, or Linear A, or Rongo-Rongo? What lost histories, forgotten wisdom, and untold stories are locked away in these silent symbols? The answers might transform our understanding of human civilization in ways we cannot yet imagine. While the ancient world holds many mysteries in the form of undeciphered scripts, it also holds mysteries in the form of physical artifacts that seem to defy their historical context. Objects that possess qualities or capabilities that appear too advanced for the time in which they were made. Objects that make us wonder whether ancient peoples had knowledge that has been lost. We have already discussed the iron pillar of Delhi and the precision stonework of Puma Punku. But there are other examples that are equally puzzling. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, one of the most extraordinary artifacts ever recovered from antiquity. In 1901, sponge divers exploring the wreck of an ancient ship off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera discovered a corroded lump of bronze and wood that at first seemed unremarkable. But as researchers began to study it, they realized that they had found something extraordinary. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be called, is a complex device consisting of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears housed in a wooden box. It dates to approximately 150 to 100 before the Common Era, making it more than 2,000 years old. When it was intact and functioning, the mechanism was an analog computer capable of calculating and displaying the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, predicting eclipses, tracking the Fourier cycle of the ancient Olympic Games, and performing other astronomical calculations. The complexity of the Antikythera mechanism is astounding. Nothing comparable is known to have existed anywhere in the world for more than 1,000 years after it was made. Similar levels of mechanical sophistication would not be seen again until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe in the 14th century. The existence of the Antikythera mechanism raises important questions. If ancient Greek civilization was capable of producing such a device, why do we not have more examples? Were similar devices common, or was the Antikythera mechanism a unique creation? The answers seem to lie in the fragility of such mechanisms and the loss of knowledge when civilizations decline. Bronze corrodes, wood decays, and complex mechanical knowledge can be lost within a few generations if the artisans who possess it die without training successors. The Antikythera mechanism survived only because it happened to be preserved underwater, protected from oxidation for 2,000 years by the mud and marine sediment. Modern analysis of the Antikythera mechanism has revealed the extraordinary knowledge of its makers. The device incorporates precise astronomical calculations, including the animalistic period of the Moon and the elliptical nature of the Moon's orbit. It uses differential gearing, a technology that was not thought to have existed until the 16th century. It represents a synthesis of Greek astronomical theory and mechanical engineering that has no parallel in the ancient world. Who built the Antikythera mechanism, and why? We do not know for certain. It may have been created in a workshop on the island of Rhodes, which was a center of astronomical and mechanical expertise in the Hellenistic world. It was probably being transported to a wealthy client, perhaps in Rome, when the ship carrying it sank. The identity of the artisan or artisans who made it, and the intellectual tradition they represented, are lost to history. Another puzzling artifact is the Baghdad battery, a set of ceramic pots dating to the Parthian or Sasanian period, roughly the 2nd century before the Common Era to the 3rd century of the Common Era. The pots contain copper cylinders surrounding iron rods, and when filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar or grape juice, they can produce a small electrical current. The Baghdad battery, if used as a battery, would predate the modern invention of the battery by nearly 2,000 years. The interpretation of the Baghdad battery as a battery is controversial. Some researchers have argued that it was used for electroplating gold onto silver objects, a technique that would have required knowledge of electricity that we did not think ancient peoples possessed. Others have suggested that it was a religious or ceremonial object, perhaps a container for sacred scrolls. Still others have argued that it was simply a storage vessel, and that any electrical properties are coincidental. Whatever its original purpose, the Baghdad battery is another reminder that ancient peoples may have known and done things that we have forgotten or overlooked. Whether they understood electricity in any meaningful sense is unclear, but the possibility that they might have raises intriguing questions about the nature and extent of ancient knowledge. The Nazca lines of Peru present a different kind of mystery. Located in the arid coastal plain of southern Peru, the Nazca lines are enormous geoglyphs, designs made by removing the dark surface stones to reveal the lighter soil beneath. The lines were created by the Nazca culture, which flourished between approximately 500 before the Common Era and 500 of the Common Era. The Nazca lines include hundreds of designs, ranging from simple geometric shapes to elaborate figures of animals such as monkeys, spiders, hummingbirds, and killer whales. Some of the designs are hundreds of meters across, so large that their full shape can only be appreciated from the air. The precision and scale of the Nazca lines have inspired many theories about their purpose and how they were created. The Nazca lines are not just impressive in their size. They are also remarkable in their execution. Many of the figures are drawn with a single continuous line, without lifting the tool from the surface. The proportions are accurate, and the designs are clearly recognizable despite their enormous scale. Creating them would have required careful planning and the ability to visualize the completed design in relation to the landscape. The purpose of the Nazca lines has been the subject of much debate. Some theories suggest that they were used for astronomical observation, with the lines pointing to the positions of celestial bodies at significant times of the year. Others propose that they were ritual pathways, walked by priests or pilgrims in ceremonial processions. Still others suggest that they were connected to water and fertility rituals, given their location in one of the driest regions in the world. The Swiss author Erich von Däniken famously proposed that the lines were landing strips for ancient astronauts, a theory that has been thoroughly discredited but that continues to appear in popular media. The most likely explanation is that the Nazca lines served multiple purposes, combining religious, ceremonial, and practical functions. The Nazca people probably created and used the lines over centuries, adapting their meanings and functions as their culture evolved. The lines are a testament to the ingenuity and dedication of the Nazca people, who transformed their landscape into a vast canvas for expressing their beliefs and understanding of the world. The Nazca culture itself eventually declined, possibly due to environmental stresses including deforestation and drought. The lines, protected by the extremely dry climate of the region, have survived remarkably well for centuries. But they are now threatened by modern human activities, including illegal mining, land invasions, and even damage caused by tourism. The preservation of the Nazca lines is an ongoing challenge, and their continued existence is not guaranteed. We have traveled across continents and through millennia in our exploration of lost civilizations. We have seen how great cities can be swallowed by jungles, how mighty empires can be forgotten by history, how technologies can be lost and rediscovered, and how the boundaries between history, myth, and legend can blur in ways that both frustrate and inspire us. But there is another dimension to this exploration that we have not yet fully addressed. What patterns can we discern across these diverse civilizations and their fates? What can the study of lost civilizations tell us about the nature of complex human societies, their vulnerabilities, and their capacity for resilience? One pattern that emerges clearly is the vulnerability of complex societies to environmental change. Every one of the civilizations we have discussed depended on its environment for the basic necessities of life, and every one of them faced environmental challenges that contributed to their decline. The Maya faced prolonged drought. The Indus Valley Civilization faced the weakening of the monsoon and the drying of rivers. The Akkadian Empire faced a period of severe aridity. The Bronze Age Mediterranean societies faced a combination of climate change and resource scarcity. This pattern is not accidental. Complex societies require reliable food supplies to maintain their populations, and food supplies depend on stable environmental conditions. When conditions change dramatically, as they did in each of these cases, the food systems that sustain civilizations come under stress. If the change is gradual and the society is flexible, it may be able to adapt. If the change is rapid or severe, or if the society is rigid or unable to respond effectively, collapse becomes likely. This has obvious implications for our own time. We are currently living through a period of rapid environmental change, driven by human activities that are altering the Earth's climate at an unprecedented rate. The lessons of history suggest that we need to take these changes seriously, that we need to develop the flexibility and resilience to adapt to changing conditions, and that we need to avoid the kinds of rigid, unsustainable practices that contributed to the collapse of past civilizations. Another pattern that emerges is the importance of social organization and institutional capacity. The civilizations that we have discussed all developed sophisticated systems for organizing labor, allocating resources, resolving disputes, and coordinating collective action. These systems allowed them to accomplish great things, from building monumental architecture to managing complex agricultural systems to maintaining long-distance trade networks. But the same systems could also become sources of vulnerability. If the systems became too rigid, too corrupt, or too focused on the interests of a narrow elite, they could lose their capacity to respond to challenges. Social inequality, political instability, and institutional failure all played roles in the decline of the civilizations we have studied. The Maya, for example, developed a system of competing city-states ruled by divine kings who legitimized their authority through elaborate rituals and monumental construction. This system allowed for remarkable achievements in art, architecture, and astronomy, but it also created intense competition and warfare between city-states. When environmental pressures increased in the late Classic period, the system was unable to respond effectively. Competition intensified, warfare escalated, and the elite continued to invest in prestige projects while the common people suffered. Eventually, the system collapsed, and the great cities were abandoned. Similar dynamics can be seen in other cases. The Akkadian Empire depended on a highly centralized administrative system that was vulnerable to disruption when its central authority was weakened. The Indus Valley cities show evidence of gradual decline in maintenance and organization, suggesting that their sophisticated urban systems became harder to maintain over time. The late Bronze Age palace economies collapsed when the international trade networks that sustained them broke down. Yet another pattern is the role of contingency and unpredictable events. History is not deterministic. The fate of civilizations depends not only on broad structural factors but also on specific events, decisions, and coincidences that could have gone otherwise. A drought that lasted a few extra years, an invasion by a particularly effective enemy, a plague that struck at a critical moment, all of these can tip the balance between survival and collapse. The Bronze Age collapse was partly the result of specific events, including the invasions of the Sea Peoples and the destruction of key trading cities. If these events had not happened, or if they had happened differently, the trajectory of Mediterranean civilization might have been very different. The collapse of the Hittite Empire was accelerated by the destruction of Hattusa, which may have been caused by internal rebellion, external invasion, or some combination. The identity of the destroyers, and their motivations, remain unknown, but their actions had consequences that shaped the history of the following centuries. This element of contingency reminds us that history is not just a story of impersonal forces. It is also a story of human choices, human failures, and human accidents. Every civilization contains within itself the potential for greatness and the potential for disaster. Which potential is realized depends on countless factors, some of which are within human control and many of which are not. As we conclude our exploration of lost civilizations, it is worth reflecting on what we have learned and what remains to be discovered. The picture that emerges is one of astonishing diversity and complexity. Human civilization is not a single story but many stories, unfolding in different places at different times, with different characters and different outcomes. Every civilization is unique, But every civilization is also part of a larger pattern of human development. The lost civilizations we have discussed represent only a fraction of what has existed. There are certainly many more that we have not yet discovered, buried beneath forests, deserts, and oceans, waiting for the tools and techniques that will reveal them. Every year brings new discoveries. Every decade rewrites some part of what we thought we knew. The story of human civilization is far from complete, and it may never be complete. But the process of discovery, of learning, of expanding our understanding of who we are and where we came from, is one of the most important and exciting endeavors of the human spirit. The lost civilizations also remind us of our own place in history. We are not the final chapter. We are not the culmination of some inevitable progression toward greater complexity and sophistication. We are part of a much larger story, and our civilization, like every civilization before it, will eventually come to an end. What form that end takes, and what comes after, depends on the choices we make and the challenges we face. The lessons of the past are not simple, and they cannot be reduced to easy formulas or slogans. But they do suggest certain themes that deserve our attention. The importance of adapting to environmental change. The dangers of rigid institutions and extreme inequality. The value of flexibility, diversity, and resilience. The need to maintain the knowledge and skills that allow us to sustain complex societies. The recognition that our achievements are not permanent, and that they require ongoing effort to preserve. These lessons are not new, but they are always relevant. The stories of lost civilizations are our stories too, in a sense, because we share with them the fundamental human experience of building societies, facing challenges, and struggling to preserve what we have created. The specific details of our situation are different, but the underlying themes are the same. We can learn from those who came before us, if we are willing to listen. Deep beneath the ocean waves, in places where sunlight cannot reach, ancient landscapes lie preserved in a state of eternal twilight. The seas that cover more than 70% of our planet hide countless secrets, including the remains of coastal settlements that were flooded when the ice ages ended and sea levels rose. Underwater archaeology, once a niche discipline requiring specialized equipment and skills, has become an increasingly important field as technology has advanced. The Mediterranean Sea is particularly rich in underwater archaeological sites. Ancient shipwrecks litter the sea floor, containing artifacts that shed light on trade, warfare, and daily life in the ancient world. The Uluburun shipwreck, discovered off the southwestern coast of Turkey in 1982, dates to the late 14th century before the Common Era and contained one of the richest cargoes ever found from the Bronze Age. Copper and tin ingots, glass, ivory, pottery, weapons, jewelry, and even the writing tablet that may have recorded the cargo were all preserved in the ship. The Uluburun wreck has provided invaluable insights into the international trade networks of the late Bronze Age. But shipwrecks are just the beginning. Entire cities have been discovered beneath the sea. The city of Pavlopetri, off the southern coast of Greece, is one of the oldest submerged cities in the world. It dates to the Bronze Age and features streets, buildings, courtyards, and tombs that have been mapped in detail using underwater surveying techniques. Pavlopetri was inhabited for perhaps 2,000 years before being submerged by rising sea levels around 1,000 before the Common Era. Similar submerged sites have been found around the world. Off the coast of India, the city of Dvarka, associated with legends of the god Krishna, has been the subject of underwater investigations that have revealed structures on the sea floor. The Yonaguni monument off the coast of Japan features what some researchers interpret as evidence of human construction, though the interpretation is disputed. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar surveys have detected features that some have claimed are the remains of a submerged city, though these claims remain controversial. The exploration of submerged landscapes is still in its early stages. The tools required for large-scale underwater archaeology, including advanced sonar systems, remotely operated vehicles, and sophisticated survey techniques, are expensive and require specialized expertise. But as these tools become more accessible, the pace of discovery is accelerating. In the coming decades, we can expect to learn much more about the coastal populations that were displaced by rising seas at the end of the last ice age, and about the maritime civilizations that flourished in ancient times. The discoveries yet to come will undoubtedly transform our understanding of the past in ways we cannot now anticipate. New technologies will reveal new sites. New analytical techniques will extract new information from existing evidence. New theoretical frameworks will help us interpret what we find in new ways. The field of archaeology is more dynamic and productive today than it has ever been, and the pace of discovery is accelerating. Consider the impact of just a few of the technologies that have transformed archaeology in recent decades. LiDAR, which we have discussed extensively, has revealed hidden cities and landscapes beneath jungles around the world. Ground-penetrating radar allows archaeologists to detect buried structures without excavation, guiding their work with unprecedented precision. Satellite imagery, including infrared and multispectral scans, can identify archaeological sites from space. DNA analysis of ancient remains has revolutionized our understanding of human migration, kinship, and disease. Isotope analysis of bones and teeth can reveal where individuals grew up and what they ate. Advanced radiocarbon dating techniques provide increasingly precise dates for archaeological materials. Each of these technologies has expanded the frontiers of what is possible in archaeology. But they are only the beginning. Future technologies will undoubtedly enable even more remarkable discoveries. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are beginning to be applied to archaeological problems, from analyzing satellite imagery to deciphering ancient scripts. Advanced imaging techniques are revealing the contents of unopened scrolls and the inscriptions on eroded stones. As these tools mature and are combined with traditional archaeological methods, the potential for discovery is enormous. But technology is not the only factor driving archaeological progress. The field is also becoming more inclusive and diverse. Indigenous peoples are increasingly being recognized as stakeholders in the study of their own histories, and their perspectives and knowledge are enriching archaeological interpretation. International collaborations are bringing together researchers from many countries and traditions, allowing for broader and more nuanced understandings of the past. The barriers between academic archaeology and popular interest are being lowered, with digital media allowing more people than ever to engage with archaeological discoveries. The exploration of lost civilizations is not just about understanding the past. It is also about understanding ourselves. Every civilization that has ever existed has grappled with the same fundamental questions. How do we live together? How do we organize our societies? How do we relate to our environment? How do we make sense of our place in the universe? The answers have varied enormously across time and space, but the questions have remained constant. By studying the many different ways that human beings have tried to answer these questions, we gain a broader perspective on our own attempts. We see that our current arrangements are not the only possible arrangements, that other societies have organized themselves in radically different ways, and that many of the things we take for granted about civilization are actually recent innovations or cultural choices rather than universal necessities. This perspective can be humbling, but it can also be liberating. It reminds us that we have the freedom to make different choices, to build our societies differently, to face our challenges in new ways. The lost civilizations also remind us of the fragility of human achievements. The great cities that we have discussed, from Yapano to Hattusa to Mohenjo-Daro to Akkad, were built by people who believed they were creating something permanent. They invested enormous resources and effort in their monuments, their institutions, and their traditions. And yet, all of them eventually fell. The buildings crumbled. The institutions collapsed. The traditions were forgotten. In many cases, even the names of the people who had built these civilizations were lost. This is a sobering reflection. It suggests that permanence is not something we can achieve through our own efforts. Everything we build will eventually decay. Every institution we create will eventually fail. Every tradition we establish will eventually be forgotten. In the long run, on the scale of millennia and beyond, we are all like the ancient civilizations that came before us. We are here for a brief moment, and then we are gone. But this recognition does not have to be discouraging. On the contrary, it can be liberating. If we cannot achieve permanence, then perhaps we should focus on other things. We can focus on making our brief time meaningful, on treating each other with kindness and respect, on caring for the environment that sustains us, on creating beauty and wisdom and joy in the world. We can build our civilizations not with the expectation that they will last forever, but with the aspiration that they will contribute something valuable to the ongoing human story. There is one more thing to say about lost civilizations, and it is perhaps the most important thing of all. When we study the past, we should not romanticize it. The ancient civilizations we have discussed were not utopias. They were not perfect societies from which we have fallen. They were human societies, with all the flaws and failings that human societies have always had. The great cities were built with the labor of countless anonymous workers, many of whom probably lived in poverty and hardship. The monumental architecture was often created to glorify rulers and elites, not to benefit the common people. The wealth of the great civilizations was frequently built on slavery, conquest, and exploitation. The astronomical knowledge and technical sophistication that we admire today was often the exclusive property of a small priestly or intellectual elite. Most people, in most ancient civilizations, lived lives of hard labor and limited opportunity. This is not a condemnation of ancient civilizations. It is simply an acknowledgement that they were, like us, human societies with human problems. We should not idealize them any more than we should dismiss them. We should try to see them clearly, in all their complexity, and learn from them what we can. At the same time, we should recognize what was genuinely admirable in these civilizations. Their achievements in art, architecture, science, and social organization were often remarkable. Their ability to sustain complex societies and challenging environments demonstrates the ingenuity and adaptability of human beings. Their religious and philosophical traditions produced insights that continue to influence us today. Their existence, even in the face of eventual collapse, testifies to the enduring human capacity for greatness. The lost civilizations are our ancestors, in a broad sense. Not necessarily our direct genealogical ancestors, but our cultural and intellectual ancestors, the predecessors who wrestled with the same fundamental challenges that we face today and who left us a rich inheritance of knowledge, art, and wisdom. Studying them is a way of honoring them, of keeping their memory alive, of ensuring that their achievements are not entirely forgotten even though their societies have long since disappeared. Our journey through the world of lost civilizations has taken us across continents and through millennia. We have visited the hidden cities of the Amazon, walked the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, wondered at the precision of Puma Punku, and contemplated the mysteries of Göbekli Tepe. We have met the Hittites and lost them again, searched in vain for Akkad, and traced the echoes of Atlantis and Lemuria through history and legend. And yet, we have only scratched the surface. The world is full of lost civilizations, some known to us in outline, others known only in fragments, and many more still completely unknown, waiting to be discovered. Every jungle, every desert, every mountain range, every ocean floor may hide the remains of societies that once thrived and are now forgotten. The story of human civilization is far vaster and more diverse than we have yet realized, and every year brings new discoveries that expand and complicate our understanding. The tools that allow us to make these discoveries are more powerful than ever before. LiDAR, satellite imagery, DNA analysis, climate reconstruction, isotope analysis, machine learning, and many other technologies are transforming the field of archaeology. The pace of discovery is accelerating, and the coming decades will almost certainly bring revelations that we cannot now imagine. Cities we have never heard of will be found. Civilizations we cannot conceive of will be revealed. Our understanding of the human past will be transformed again and again. But even as our knowledge grows, mysteries will remain. Some questions may never be answered. Some scripts may never be deciphered. Some civilizations may leave traces so faint that we can never fully reconstruct their stories. The past is vast, and our access to it is limited. We can only see fragments, and we must always be humble about the limits of our understanding. Yet this incompleteness is not a failure. It is an invitation. It calls us to continue exploring, to keep asking questions, to remain open to surprise and wonder. The past will always have more to tell us, if we are willing to listen. The lost civilizations will always have more to teach us, if we are willing to learn. As we come to the end of this exploration, let us pause to consider what all of this means for us. We live in a time of unprecedented change. Our civilization faces challenges that no previous civilization has faced, from climate change to nuclear weapons to global pandemics to artificial intelligence. The choices we make in the coming decades will shape the future of humanity in profound ways. The lost civilizations we have studied cannot tell us exactly what to do. Our situation is unique, and history does not repeat itself in simple ways. But the lost civilizations can offer us perspective. They can remind us that we are not the first to face great challenges, and that our achievements, while impressive, are not immune to failure. They can help us understand the patterns of rise and fall, the factors that contribute to collapse, and the qualities that enable resilience. Above all, the lost civilizations can inspire us. They can remind us of what human beings are capable of when they work together, when they dedicate themselves to great projects, when they push the boundaries of what is possible. The pyramids of Giza and the temples of Angkor Wat, the observatory at Chichen Itza and the megaliths of Göbekli Tepe, the drainage systems of Mohenjo-Daro and the roads of Upano, all of these are testaments to the extraordinary potential of human civilization. If our ancestors could accomplish such things with the tools and knowledge available to them, imagine what we might accomplish with the tools and knowledge available to us. But inspiration is not enough. We also need wisdom. We need the wisdom to understand what has worked and what has not, to learn from the successes and failures of the past, to make better choices than our predecessors did. We need the wisdom to recognize the limits of our knowledge and the fragility of our achievements. We need the wisdom to build not just for our own generation but for the generations that will come after us. The lost civilizations invite us to think in long time scales, to consider not just the immediate future but the deep future, the future measured in centuries and millennia. They remind us that whatever we build today will one day be ancient, that whatever we accomplish will one day be studied by future archaeologists, that whatever mistakes we make will one day be analyzed by future historians. This perspective can be daunting, but it can also be motivating. It can help us take our responsibilities seriously, to think carefully about the legacy we are creating, to try to leave the world a better place than we found it. The earth remembers. It remembers in its layers of sediment, in its deposits of pollen and charcoal, in its accumulated ruins and artifacts, in its patterns of vegetation shaped by ancient agriculture. The earth is a vast archive, storing the traces of everything that has happened on its surface. Most of these traces are invisible to us, buried too deep or too widely dispersed to be easily read. But some of them can be recovered, if we know where to look and how to interpret what we find. The lost civilizations we have discussed are not truly lost. Their cities have been buried, their languages forgotten, their memories faded. But they have not been erased entirely. Traces of them remain in the earth, waiting to be discovered. And as we discover them, they come back to us, in a sense. Their stories are told again, their achievements are recognized, their existence is acknowledged. In this way, our archaeological work is a form of remembrance, a way of honoring those who came before us by refusing to let them be entirely forgotten. Someday, perhaps, our own civilization will be one of the lost ones. Someday, in a distant future that we can hardly imagine, other archaeologists may study our ruins and try to reconstruct our lives. They may wonder what our cities looked like when they were inhabited, what our languages sounded like when they were spoken, what our beliefs and stories meant to us. They may piece together the story of our rise and perhaps our fall. What will they find? What will they learn about us from the traces we leave behind? What kind of civilization will we appear to have been, from the perspective of the distant future? These are questions worth thinking about. They are questions that connect us to the lost civilizations we have studied. Just as we look back at the ancients and try to understand them, someday others will look back at us and try to understand us. What we do now, how we live, what we build, what we destroy, all of it will contribute to the picture that future generations will have of our time. The story of lost civilizations is, in the end, the story of humanity. It is the story of who we have been, who we are, and who we might become. It is a story of astonishing diversity and creativity, of remarkable achievements and terrible failures, of enduring hopes and recurring tragedies. It is a story that is still being written, and we are all part of it, whether we recognize it or not. As we bring this exploration to its conclusion, we return to the questions with which we began. What if everything we know about ancient history is wrong? What if there are civilizations we have not yet discovered, technologies we have not yet understood, stories we have not yet heard? What if the past is far more complex, far more surprising, and far more relevant than we realized? The answer, based on everything we have discussed, is that the past is indeed all of these things and more. Our understanding of ancient history is constantly being revised as new discoveries are made. Civilizations that were completely unknown a few decades ago are now recognized as major forces in human history. Sites that were thought to be minor are now understood to have been vast urban complexes. Peoples who were dismissed as primitive are now appreciated as sophisticated engineers, artists, and thinkers. The story of the human past is much richer than we ever knew, and it is getting richer all the time. But we should not think that the discoveries end with cities in the Amazon or hidden pyramids in the jungle. The most important discoveries about the ancient world may not be about specific places or artifacts at all. They may be about the fundamental nature of human civilization, about the ways that human beings have organized themselves, about the possibilities that have been realized and the possibilities that have been missed. The lost civilizations, in their diversity and their similarities, offer us a vast laboratory of human experience. If we study them carefully, we may learn things about ourselves that we could not learn in any other way. The journey is not over. The journey has only just begun. And every one of us, in our own way, is a part of it. Whether we are professional archaeologists uncovering ancient ruins, or ordinary people simply curious about the past, we all contribute to the ongoing effort to understand who we are and where we came from. Every book we read, every documentary we watch, every conversation we have about history is a small act of remembrance, a small contribution to the vast collective effort to know our past. The lost civilizations are waiting for us, in the jungles and the deserts, beneath the oceans and inside the mountains. They are waiting to be found, waiting to be understood, waiting to have their stories told. And with every new discovery, with every new piece of evidence, with every new interpretation, they come a little closer to us. They speak to us across the millennia, through the medium of stone and bone and pottery and text. They remind us that we are not alone in the human story. We are part of a great continuity, connected to those who came before us and those who will come after. The earth remembers. And through our efforts, we can remember too. We can honor the lost civilizations not by mourning them but by learning from them, not by imitating them but by understanding them, not by trying to recreate them but by using their example to build our own civilization more wisely. This is the greatest gift that the past can give us. And it is a gift that we can accept, if we are wise enough to do so. The story continues. And each of us is part of it, whether we know it or not. May we be worthy of the story we are helping to write. May we build a civilization that, even if it too eventually falls, leaves behind traces worth remembering. May we, in our own small way, become part of the great human adventure that stretches back through the ages and forward into an unknown future. The lost civilizations have spoken. Now it is our turn to listen. And to act. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows of forgotten worlds. The mysteries we have explored are only a small selection of the countless wonders that the ancient past has to offer. There is much more to discover, much more to learn, much more to wonder at. The story of humanity is far vaster than any one documentary can capture, and every new discovery adds a chapter that we could not have anticipated. If this exploration has awakened in you a sense of wonder about the ancient world, if it has made you question what you thought you knew about history, if it has inspired you to learn more, then it has accomplished its purpose. The past is not dead. It lives on in the stones and the soil, in the artifacts and the ruins, in the memories and the myths. And it lives on in us, the descendants of all those countless generations of human beings who came before us and made our existence possible. May we honor them by remembering. And may we, in turn, be remembered by those who come after us.